Ever wondered what actually happens when God's power moves through ordinary people in completely extraordinary ways? Tonight, you will hear the incredible story of two of Scripture's most remarkable prophets, Elijah, the man who called down fire from the sky, and Elisha, who worked twice as many miracles. He raised the dead, multiplied oil, stopped armies, and cleansed lepers. Their interwoven lives show us God's constant faithfulness stretching across generations. As you settle in and drift towards sleep, let these ancient accounts of faith, courage, and divine power wash over you. If this is your first time listening, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button if these stories help you unwind. Tell us in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is there. We really love hearing from you. Let's begin. A whisper on the wind. Desert winds carry ancient tales across these dry hills. They sweep through valleys where shepherds once walked over stones that still hold the faint memory of footsteps from long ago. In this land, trapped between sea and wilderness, between promise and hard struggle, even the air itself feels heavy with memory. Israel's hills rise like sleeping giants beneath an endless sky. Gnarled olive trees twist their silver branches toward heaven, their leaves catching light that has shone over this ground for thousands of years. Below wheat fields stretch out golden in the morning sun. This is the land God promised to Abraham, the very soil Moses saw from afar, and Joshua claimed with faith and sword. But something has shifted in the air. The wind carries more than simple dust. It brings the sweet scent of burning incense drifting up from pagan altars. Voices chant to foreign gods like Baal and Asher. The people who once walked closely with Abraham's God now bow before cold carved images. They have forgotten the voice that split the Red Sea, the hand that fed them manna in the wilderness. King Ahab sits on his throne in Samaria, his kingdom heavy beneath his rule, not because of taxes or war, though those exist. This heavy weight comes from somewhere much deeper, a spiritual darkness settling over the country like cold fog on a still lake. When people turn away from God, even the earth itself seems to hold its breath. Inside the palace, Queen Jezebel speaks with an authority that makes grown men step back. She comes from Sidon, bringing the dark worship of Baal with her. Her voice carries the absolute confidence of someone who has never questioned her own desires. Under her sway, pagan altars multiply like weeds after a heavy rain. God's true prophets flee to mountain caves or fall by her sword. Yet heaven is not silent. In the courts of eternity, decisions are already being made. Plans are already in motion. The God who spoke light into darkness prepares to send his voice into this desperate age, not through massive armies or shaking earthquakes, but through a single man, a prophet who will stand before kings and speak truth without flinching. The wind picks up, stirring the dust along ancient paths. It blows through the rugged hills of Gilead, past the Jordan River, toward a destiny that will shake an entire kingdom. Soon a figure will emerge from the wilderness, a man whose very name means, Yahweh is my God. His footsteps will echo through history, and his words will bring fire down from heaven. But for now, the wind only whispers through the valley. Olive trees bend and sway. The wheat fields ripple like golden waves across a vast sea. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbles, even though not a single cloud darkens the blue sky. The storm is coming. The stage is set. And God is about to speak. In the quiet space between one breath and the next, change begins. It starts small, like a seed pressed deep into rich soil, like a soft whisper that grows into a shout, or a single raindrop that starts a flood. The spiritual climate is shifting. This sleeping kingdom is about to wake, a troubled kingdom. Israel should be a garden, but instead it is a spiritual wasteland. Under King Ahab's 22-year reign, the nation has drifted far from the God who rescued them from Egypt. It started slowly, like a ship whose anchor silently slips away in the night. Now the distance between heaven and earth feels as vast as the desert itself. Ahab is not the worst king Israel has ever seen, but he is weak where strength matters most. When dealing with his foreign wife Jezebel, he bends like a reed in the wind. She speaks and he listens. She commands and he quickly obeys. What began as a standard political marriage has turned into total spiritual surrender. Jezebel arrives from Sidon carrying far more than just royal robes and jewelry. She brings 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asher. These pagan servants eat at her table, sleep in her palaces, and spread their worship everywhere. They build high places on every hillside, carving sacred poles and statues. They light fires to gods who cannot see or hear, while the people watch and think change is coming. If the palace worships new gods, perhaps they should too. Fear also plays its part, as Jezebel's sword has already tasted the blood of God's prophets. Speaking against Baal is highly dangerous. It is much safer to bow with the crowd than to stand alone. Worship of Baal promises them everything: fertility for crops, rain for parched fields, prosperity for merchants and farmers. The ceremonies are loud and wild, filled with chaotic dancing, cutting, and shouting. They offer a raw excitement that the quiet worship of Yahweh seems to lack. But promises and reality often walk down very different paths. God's true prophets hide in dark caves like the 100 that Hodiah shelters with bread and water in secret. Some flee to neighboring kingdoms. Others choose death over bowing to Baal. The schools of prophets that once thrived in Bethlehem and Jericho fall silent. God's voice feels as distant as stars on a cloudy night. Yet even in this darkness, the covenant promises remain. God remembers his word to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. The oath made to David still stands firm as bedrock. Though Israel wanders like a lost sheep, the Good Shepherd has never once forgotten his flock. Discipline may come, but destruction will not have the final word. The covenant holds both blessing and curse. Choose life and live, or choose death and die. Israel has chosen poorly, and the consequences follow like long shadows at sunset. Drought hovers on the horizon like a dark promise no one wants to see fulfilled. The rains that should fall in their season wait for heaven's command. In the spiritual world, heavy battles rage beyond human sight as angels of light war against darkness. Principalities and powers clash over a nation's soul. What happens in royal palaces and pagan temples echoes across the heavens. What is bound on earth reflects the heavens. King Ahab sits in his ivory palace, surrounded by luxury bought with compromise. His walls gleam with costly silver. Tables overflow with fine wine and rich food. But prosperity built on betrayal is just a house built on shifting sand. When the storm hits, those walls collapse with a deafening crash. Now the people just mimic their old faith, whispering God's name in secret. They still remember the stories of old: Abraham's long trek, Moses at the burning bush, and the sweet songs of David. But memory without action fades like winter light. What is ignored starts to die. Confused children learn prayers to Yahweh from mothers and chants to Baal from fathers. They look at altars to both deities and wonder who actually rules. This quiet doubt spreads outward like ripples in a dark pond. Every new generation is more lost than the last. And yet, the Almighty remains unshaken, preparing his plans on his own sovereign timeline. Deep in the courts of heaven, the decree is set. A prophet rises. A voice speaks. The tide of darkness is finally about to turn back toward light. The stage is set for a clash. Divine patience has run out, and the days of gentle warning are over. Now comes the thunder. Now comes the fire. Now comes the wild man who will face kings and speak the raw truth. Enter Elijah the Tishbite. He bursts into Ahab's court like lightning from a clear sky. No herald cries out, no messenger clears the path before him. 1 second, the throne room is full of pampered advisors. The next, a wild stranger stands right before the king. His rough clothes reek of wilderness wind. His hair is long and matted from the sun and dust. His stare has a weight that makes proud nobles look down. No soft, court-trained whisperer here. This man is entirely different, unpredictable, and dangerous. Palace guards step forward, their hands instantly dropping to their sword hilts. Who is this beggar to barge into the king's chambers uninvited? Yet something in the man's posture freezes them in their tracks. He carries a weight that owes nothing to human power. When he speaks, even the king listens. As the Lord God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the coming years, except by my word. The threat drops heavily into the silent room. Shivers of shock ripple through the crowd. Did this peasant just threaten the king of Israel with starvation? His name is Elijah, a Tishbite from Gilead. Even his name is a battle cry. My God is Yahweh. While the kingdom worships Baal as the Lord of rain, this outsider claims a different master. The line in the sand is drawn. Ahab's face turns crimson with rage, but before he can even open his mouth, the prophet spins on his heel. He does not bow to the throne. He asks no permission to leave. He simply walks out as fast as he arrived. He leaves behind words that will echo through years of brutal dust. Elijah has lived most of his days east of the Jordan in wild Gilead. Out here where the dry waste meets the fields, a man learns to trust God for every breath. Water is hidden and food is hard to find. Only the strong survive here, and only the loyal endure. These rugged hills of Gilead seem to breed prophets like nowhere else on earth. Maybe the vast silence teaches a man to hear the divine. Maybe the dry heat burns away everything except what truly matters. Or maybe God just speaks louder when human noise fades away. Years of quiet isolation have prepared Elijah for this hour, teaching him to trust when nothing makes sense. He learned that the Lord's thoughts are far above our thoughts, high as the heavens. This dry wilderness was his training ground. Loneliness was his teacher. Absolute trust was his final exam. Now he carries a word that will test everything. A great drought is hitting Israel. This is no normal dry summer that farmers prepare for. It is a disaster beyond living memory. 3 long years with no rain, no dew. 3 years of watching the soil split open under a blazing sun. It sounds like a death sentence, but there is one spark of hope. Rain returns when Elijah speaks. Only when he commands it will the skies open. The key to Israel's survival lies in the hands of the man they will soon hunt down as an enemy. The priests of Baal claim their idol rules the sky, that storm clouds and lightning flash at his command. That rain falls only at their god's pleasure. But now they will learn the vast difference between cold carved stone and the living God of Israel. This dry spell will put Baal on trial. Let the rain god prove himself. Let his prophets beg for water from the empty sky. Let his 450 priests scream and slash themselves until their blood runs. The sky will stay like hard brass, the earth like cold iron, and Israel will know who rules. Elijah walks out of Samaria knowing his old life is gone. There is no going back to the quiet pastures of Gilead now, no peaceful years tending flocks or sowing wheat. He has thrown down the glove before the most ruthless rulers in the land. From today, he belongs to the storm. But he does not travel alone. The Lord who sent him to Ahab's face will not leave him to rot in the wilderness. Food and water wait in places no human has ever found. Protection exists far beyond Ahab's reach. The road ahead will stretch his faith to the breaking point. But tested faith is hardened faith. Behind him in the palace, utter chaos erupts. Who was that wild fanatic? Where did he come from? What drought is he talking about? Advisors whisper and panic like dry leaves in a gust. Only Queen Jezebel remains deadly quiet, her cold eyes narrowed in calculation. She knows a threat when she sees one. The die is cast. The prophet has spoken. Now comes the heavy weight and the testing. Soon everyone will see who truly rules the rain and the sun, the blessing and the curse. Then God's voice breaks through the silence like morning light. Leave here and turn eastward. Go hide in the Kerth ravine east of the Jordan. Drink from the brook, and the ravens will feed you there. That was the command. Elijah obeys without hesitation. He knows God's plans rarely fit into human logic. Run to a ravine after defying a king. Wait for birds to bring your daily bread. Heaven's methods are deep mysteries, and faith simply bows without demanding answers. The road leads him through familiar country among the rugged hills of his youth, valleys where he first learned to walk with the Creator. Every stone feels familiar. Every turn brings back quieter days, back when his only audience was sheep and wild donkeys. Kerth Ravine cuts deep into the earth like an old wound healed into beauty. Water drips down slick canyon walls, pooling before it slips toward the Jordan River. Pink and white oleanders bloom along the muddy banks. Wild fig trees reach down to shade the hidden springs. While the kingdom begins to bake in drought, this hidden canyon stays green as Eden. Elijah stacks rough stones to make a simple shelter. No heavy palace walls to guard him here. No servants. Just stone sky and the constant rush of water. The silence is pure freedom after the suffocating whispers of the royal court. Then, right on time, black wings cut across the blue sky. They carry bread and meat in their talons, arriving twice a day, regular as the tides. Never too early, never late. Always exactly what he needs. This supernatural supply works with a precision no royal kitchen could ever match. These are no ordinary birds. They carry a divine command, flying with perfect focus. No desert storm halts their flight. No predator scares them from their route. These birds are living proof that creation obeys its maker. What looks impossible to humans is natural to creatures who know their place. Elijah scoops water from the stream and eats what the birds drop. The flatbread tastes of honey, and the meat satisfies him deep in his bones. The food itself is basic, but it comes straight from the Creator. Every single bite carries the unmistakable weight of divine care. Life settles into a quiet rhythm. Dawn prayers by the creek, lazy afternoons resting under the cool overhanging rocks, nights under the cold stars. The political chaos of the capital fades, like a half-remembered dream. Only three things matter here: water, food, and the divine presence. Everything else drops away like dry autumn leaves. But this time in hiding is about much more than just escaping the wrath of King Ahab. It is a masterclass in survival and trust. Every morning he wakes up, he has to believe those wings will return. Every evening when his stomach growls, he waits for dark shapes in the clouds. No grain silos here, no emergency rations, only daily naked trust in a promise. The dry spell he decreed slowly begins to bite, rumor spreading through desperate refugees. Wells fail in villages he knows well. Ancient streams dry up to baked mud.
Farmers watch their grain rot in fields that used to ripple green with life. Ahab sends search parties into every ravine, hunting the prophet who choked off the rain. Royal spies interrogate travelers, and bounties are placed on his head. Yet Elijah stays hidden, silent as a smooth stone in deep water. An invisible shield keeps him safe. His little stream continues to ripple, even as major rivers across Israel turn to dust. The water runs cold and clean through swirling dust storms. His wild oleanders bloom, while royal gardens dry up, and his fig trees bear fruit, while massive orchards die. This tiny canyon remains blessed, while judgment burns the nation. The ravens never fail. Sunrise and sunset, the dark birds drop his meals. Not once do they fail. While famine stalks the cities, the prophet is well fed. The Creator who feeds sparrows has not forgotten his prophet. Time here slows down. Free from the noise of courts and crowds, Elijah adopts heaven's pace. He wakes with the dawn and sleeps under the stars, praying when moved and resting in the quiet. The frantic rush of mortal kingdoms dissolves into the steady pulse of eternity. Still, he knows this hiding place is only temporary. This famine is about something much bigger than his survival. Israel has to realize that Baal cannot send a drop of rain, and his priests must face their own utter helplessness. King Ahab needs to learn that earthly power is useless when heaven locks the sky. So the prophet waits by the water, trusting the birds. He drinks from a stream kept alive by a miracle. He eats food delivered from a heavenly larder, hardening his resolve for whatever struggle comes next. The national crisis is just starting. The real trial lies ahead. But in this secret place, Elijah is quietly growing strong for the coming war. Now Zarephath and its widow. The creek begins to fail, water dropping like hope in a dying land. The clean flow slows to a whisper, then a muddy trickle, then dry dust on hot stone. Even miracles have their seasons. As the dry judgment deepens, the prophet watches the last pools evaporate and waits for his next orders. He does not panic as the heat rises. The same Creator who commanded wild birds to feed him still holds the future. The long silence brings its own strange peace until the next command strikes clear as ice pack. Up. Go to Zarephath in Sidon and dwell there. A widow there has been ordered to feed you. Side in the backyard of Jezebel enemy soil, where the worship of Baal is absolute law. He is being sent deep into hostile pagan territory to survive on the mercy of a woman who does not even know his Creator's name. The raw irony tastes like wormwood. While Israel's wells run dry, despite their covenant privileges, a Gentile widow will be the one to provide for God's prophet. The journey takes days through lands growing more desperate with each mile. Desperate families choke the roads, clutching basic belongings and carrying children too weak to stand. Heavy gray dust settles over everything like a burial shroud. The sun beats down like a bronze hammer on a dying land. Zarephath sits along the Mediterranean coast, a simple town scraping by on trade and fish. But even here, far beyond Israel's borders, the dry heat leaves its mark. Gardens lie withered and brown. Cisterns hold only bitter mud. The sea gives up some fish, but it is not nearly enough to feed a crowd swollen with refugees fleeing the dying interior. Elijah reaches the town gate, exhausted and parched. The sun hangs high and brutal above him, dust coating his throat. He needs water, but even more he needs to find the widow God promised him. Out of all the desperate souls gathered in this dying town, one woman is chosen to keep heaven's messenger alive. She looks like the answer to a silent prayer. A frail woman gathering dry twigs near the gate, her movements heavy with raw hunger. Her ragged clothes show a poverty sliding into real starvation. Surely this is not her. The Almighty would choose someone with at least something to share, right? But the Spirit whispers a quiet yes to his heart. This is the one. This weeping widow clutching her small bundle of sticks. God always finds a way to shock his most faithful servants. Elijah speaks first. Please bring me a little water in a jar. His throat feels rough from days of wind and dust. It seems like a simple request, but water is nearly as precious as gold in this dry land. She looks up with hollow, grieving eyes, a familiar shadow. This woman has buried a husband. She has watched her food shrink to almost nothing. She knows the cold taste of fear when a single handful of flour sits at the bottom of a jar. Yet something in his voice makes her nod and turn back toward her shack. As she steps away, Elijah calls out, "And please bring me a piece of bread." She freezes. Slowly turning back, her voice carries the heavy weight of the grave, as surely as "The Lord your God lives," she says. "I have no bread. Only a handful of flour in a jar and some oil in a jug. I am gathering sticks to make one last meal for my son and myself. Then we die." The words hang cold in the dry air. This mother is standing on the absolute edge of existence. This final meal is a death sentence. After this, only slow starvation. And yet God chose her to feed his prophet. Such divine logic makes no human sense. But Elijah looks at her filled with compassion and rising faith. He has learned to trust heaven when things seem quite impossible, especially then. "Do not fear," he says softly, his voice like rain hitting parched earth. "Go home and do exactly what you said, but first, make a small loaf of bread for me. Bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For the Lord, the God of Israel, promises, this your jar of flour will not empty, and your jug of oil will not run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain." She stares at him like he is a ghost. This stranger is asking for her very last bite of food, yet he promises her jars will never run empty. In a land where drought makes liars of every prophet, he speaks of miracles as naturally as grief. Something in his eyes holds her. Maybe it is the quiet authority in his voice, or maybe just pure desperation, grasping at any shred of hope. Or perhaps God is whispering directly to her heart, telling her that this stranger speaks a truth far beyond human reason. She goes home and does exactly as Elijah asked. She mixes the last handful of flour and the final drops of oil, baking a loaf for the prophet waiting outside. She returns to the kitchen to prepare what should be their final meal. But the jar of flour is still full. The jug of oil is not empty either. Where starvation ruled moments ago, abundance now overflows like a hidden spring. The God of Israel has spoken. His word never returns empty. Days stretch into weeks in the small house, and the miracle of food continues without a single interruption. Each morning she expects empty jars. Yet each morning plenty remains. The God of Israel keeps his word with steady faithfulness. Soon Elijah settles into the daily rhythm of this unusual home. He stays in the upper room grateful for shelter and the sounds of life downstairs. The boy plays in the courtyard, his laughter a sweet song in a world parched by drought. For the first time in months, the prophet feels something pretty close to peace. Meanwhile, the boy grows curious about their guest. Who is this stranger with wild eyes and gentle hands? Why does he pray so much? What does he see up there, staring at the clouds like they hold secret letters? The child's questions pour out like a fresh spring, innocent and endless. Elijah grows genuinely fond of his quick mind and bright spirit. Here is a life untouched by cynicism. Just pure trust that accepts miracles as easily as morning sunshine. Elijah tells him stories of home, of the God who speaks through burning bushes and splits seas with a single word. The mother watches their friendship grow with quiet wonder. Her boy had been so quiet since his father died, worrying her deeply. Now laughter fills the house again. Hope has returned to his eyes. This strange man from Israel brought far more than food to their home. He brought back their lost joy. Then comes the morning when the boy does not wake up. His mother calls his name, her voice rising with sudden panic. She shakes his small shoulders, but his body is still as stone. No breath, no heartbeat. Death has slipped inside their home like a silent thief. Her grief explodes into raw, screaming rage. Carrying her dead son to Elijah's room, she confronts the prophet, her eyes blazing with fury. "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to expose my sin and kill my boy?" Her words cut like a knife, voicing the agonizing question of every grieving heart. Why does God let suffering touch the innocent? Why does death take children while wicked men grow old and comfortable? If the Almighty can multiply flour and oil, why could he not save a little boy from sickness? Elijah feels her agony like a physical blow. This widow took him in when he was a running fugitive. She even split her very last handful of meal with him. She trusted the God of Israel on nothing but a traveler's promise. Now her boy lies lifeless in her lap. "Give me your son," Elijah whispers. The request is sudden, but his voice is incredibly gentle. She hesitates. Then she passes her heavy, precious bundle to the prophet. The boy feels cold and incredibly light, like a tiny bird fallen from its nest. Elijah carries the limp child upstairs to his own room, laying him gently on the mattress. There he cries out to God with the raw desperation of a man whose faith is tearing at the seams. "Lord my God, have you really brought ruin on this poor widow who took me in by letting her only son die?" The words pour out with a brutal honesty that holds nothing back. This isn't some polite, rehearsed prayer for a Sabbath service. It is the scream of a breaking heart. Elijah has witnessed countless wonders, but this is the one miracle he is almost terrified to ask for. 3 times Elijah stretches his own body over the lifeless child. 3 times he pleads, "Lord my God, I beg you, let this boy's breath come back to him." His voice echoes like thunder in the cramped room. Nothing. The boy remains completely motionless. Death keeps its freezing grip tight. Yet Elijah refuses to stop. He keeps praying, clinging to the belief that the Creator who made life from nothing can spark it again in this cold, quiet body. Then, like a sudden sunrise after a long night, warmth creeps back into the boy's pale skin. A tiny flutter stirs deep inside his chest. His eyes snap open. He looks around as if waking from the deepest sleep imaginable. A sudden sharp breath fills his lungs, sounding like wind rustling through dry grass. Just like parched ground when rain finally hits, the boy sits up, blinking in confusion, before his face lights up with joy. He is alive, fully, beautifully alive. Death is forced to let go. The absolute impossible has just become real, triggered by the desperate power of relentless prayer. Elijah scoops the boy up and carries him back down to his mother. "Look," he says, "your son is alive." The simple words feel far too small for such a massive moment, yet they carry the ultimate triumph of life over the grave. The mother snatches her child, squeezing him close, as if she will never, ever let him go again. Her tears pour down, but they taste of pure joy now, not bitter grief. She looks up at Elijah with eyes that have peered past the veil of death itself. "Now I know you are a man of God," she whispers, "and that the Lord's word from your mouth is the truth." Her voice carries the raw authority of someone who just witnessed a resurrection. She has crossed from simple belief into actual knowledge, from hope to total certainty. This is the very first time in Scripture that someone is raised from the dead. The precedent set in this room will echo until another son dies and rises again, that time to stay forever. But for now, in a tiny home in Sidon, heaven has proven its ultimate power over the grave. The widow prepares food, marveling at the beautiful miracle of her boy's hunger. Watching them, Elijah feels his own faith anchor deeper, forged strong by what he has just seen. The God who commands ravens and multiplies flour can also conquer death itself. No power on earth or in the darkest abyss can stand against that kind of love. By the third year, a heavy silence has settled over Israel, like dust in an abandoned home. 3 years without rain or dew. 3 years of searching empty skies for clouds. The ground lies cracked and bleeding, painted in dull shades of brown and gray that scream of absolute starvation and death. King Ahab has aged terribly. The relentless drought has carved lines into his face deeper than any blade. His kingdom staggers like a drunkard, growing weaker with every dry season that passes. Livestock rot in the parched fields. Horses waste away to literal skeletons. Even the palace wells are nearly dry, yielding only bitter water dragged from the deepest depths. Jezebel's prophets of Baal dance themselves to collapse, screaming for rain. They slash their skin with knives, letting blood flow like the water they are powerless to summon. They yell until their throats crack like the dry ground beneath them. But the sky stays hard as brass, and their idol remains as quiet as a grave. In the shadows, the people begin to whisper. Maybe Baal isn't quite as powerful as the palace claims. Maybe the old god of their ancestors is still watching. Maybe that wild, hairy prophet who warned them of this drought was speaking the truth. But whispers are deadly when the queen has sharp ears and a sharper blade. Meanwhile, famine hunts the land like a wolf after wounded prey. The rich burn through their private reserves, while the poor claw at the hard dirt for weeds and roots. Toddlers cry themselves to sleep on empty stomachs. The elderly sit in silent doorways, their eyes heavy with too much grief. Death is now a regular guest in homes that used to know plenty. Foreign merchants steer clear of Israel. After all, who wants to trade where water is pricier than wine? Caravans bypass the borders, choosing safer, wetter routes. And this isolation makes the famine worse, turning a simple shortage into starvation. Ahab orders his soldiers to scour every cave and valley for the prophet holding the key to the rain. They interrogate travelers, hunt down refugees, and offer massive rewards. They threaten anyone suspected of hiding him. Yet Elijah remains completely hidden from their search, kept safe by the very Creator who locked up the skies. Inside the palace, royal advisors bicker constantly. Some suggest launching raids on neighboring kingdoms to steal their grain. Others think they should move the entire capital to a city with working wells. A few brave voices even suggest they turn back to Israel's true God. But those whispers die instantly whenever Jezebel walks past. The queen herself doesn't show a flicker of worry keeping up her luxury while the peasants slowly starve. Imported delicacies still pile high on her banquet table. Her private gardens remain lush and green, watered by slaves hauling jars from hidden mountain springs. If the country is suffering, she claims it is only because the people lack real faith in Baal. Still, even Jezebel feels the walls closing in. Ahab grows more volatile by the day, screaming at staff and sitting in dark silence for hours. Nearby kings watch Israel's growing weakness with cold, calculating eyes. Rival nations smell blood like sharks circling a wounded swimmer. Meanwhile, far away in Zarephath, Elijah bides his time in silent exile. The widow's home is an island of plenty, floating in a sea of starvation. Her flour never runs out. Her oil never fails. Her boy grows strong and healthy, while other children across Israel waste away from hunger. But the prophet's heart aches for his homeland. He knows the brutal cost of the suffering his words unleashed. He feels the weight of every death, every tear, every empty stomach. This drought serves God's purpose, but the human toll is beyond measure. Justice and mercy wage a quiet war in his soul. Like storm clouds gathering for battle, prayer becomes his refuge during long nights when sleep refuses to come. He speaks honestly to God about their pain, begging to know if the lesson is finally learned. He begs for the strength to bear the burden of being heaven's weapon of judgment. The God who speaks in whirlwinds and earthquakes often speaks in total silence. Elijah is learning to find meaning in those quiet spaces between words. No immediate answer comes, and that silence becomes its own kind of message. Wait. Trust. The timing belongs to heaven, not to earth. Whispers reach Zarephath through merchants and refugees fleeing along the coast. Israel grows weaker by the month. Some people are finally turning back to the God of their fathers, offering desperate prayers for rain. But most still bow to Baal, convinced their misery comes from not serving their new gods enough. The drought has done its job, exposing the total powerlessness of these false gods. It shows clearly that carved wood and cold stone cannot command the forces of nature. But has it actually changed hearts? Has it driven Israel back to their true devotion? The answer remains as blurry as morning mist over quiet water. Then, on an ordinary day that seems just like any other, the word of Yahweh comes to Elijah. Go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. That command strikes like lightning in the quiet of his long exile. 3 years of hiding ended in a single breath. 3 years of waiting are over, and a new road opens up. The drought is about to break, but it won't be quiet. Not without a massive final clash between the prophets of Baal and the God of Israel. Elijah stands up and prepares to face his journey. The widow watches him, her eyes heavy with understanding. Her son clings to the man who became a father to him during these dark years. They all know this goodbye is different. This time, the prophet isn't leaving to hide. He's going to show himself. He isn't waiting. He's ready to act. The final act of this long, dry drama is starting. The stage is set for a clash that will echo through history. On Mount Carmel before all Israel, fire will fall from heaven, and rain will flood the earth. But first, Elijah must walk straight back into a kingdom that has wanted him dead for 3 years. Obadiah and the Hidden Prophets. Inside King Ahab's palace lives a man caught between two dangerous worlds. As governor of the palace, Obadiah manages the daily life of the kingdom. His very name means servant of Yahweh, yet he works for a king who abandoned the God of Israel. This double life weighs on his conscience like a heavy stone. Very few people know the secret that could cost Obadiah his life. While Jezebel's sword drinks the blood of God's prophets, while caves echo with the cries of faithful men hunted like beasts, Obadiah hides 100 prophets in caves, 50 to a group. He feeds them bread and water quietly stolen from the royal kitchens, risking everything he owns to keep true faith alive in Israel. The operation demands absolute secrecy and constant vigilance. He has to find caves deep enough to hide 50 men, yet close enough for supply runs. Food must be stolen without anyone noticing. Even water jars must be snuck out carefully. One slip, one suspicious guard, or a single rumor whispered in the wrong ear would end in execution. Obadiah walks the palace halls like he is crossing thin ice. He even sits in on meetings where Jezebel plots to murder God's remaining prophets. He listens to reports about the manhunt for Elijah, nodding quietly and keeping his face completely blank. But his heart burns with the quiet war between duty and faith. In the dark, the hidden prophets know they owe their lives. to him. They pray for him constantly, begging God to shield their protector. They know exactly what kind of danger he faces every single day. One whisper from Jezebel would mean instant death, not just for them, but for the man risking everything to keep them alive. Their dark shelters become secret schools of faith. Older prophets teach the younger ones the songs of David, reciting the law of Moses from memory. They recount Abraham's journey and Joshua's great victories. Deep in the darkness of their hiding places, the light of God's truth burns as bright as stars in a dark sky. Obadiah's faith only grows stronger under this constant pressure. Every successful supply run deepens his trust. Every narrow escape proves to him that heaven watches over those who serve with a true heart. He learns firsthand that courage isn't the absence of fear, but staying faithful right in the middle of it. The drought makes his mission both harder and easier. It is harder because food is disappearing across the entire land. A single loaf of bread is worth its weight in gold. Every water jar is carefully rationed and tracked. But it gets easier too, because the sheer chaos provides cover. In times like these, people don't notice when a few extra supplies go missing. The palace struggles just like everyone else. Servants work harder for tiny portions, and guards grow angry from thirst. Even King Ahab's table has almost nothing left on it. Obadiah uses this confusion to slide supplies away, planning every move with the care of a man who knows a single mistake means death. News reaches the palace daily about the hunt for Elijah. Ahab has sent messengers to every neighboring nation demanding to know if they are hiding the prophet who cursed Israel. Nearby rulers swear solemn oaths they have never seen him. Others simply refused to help. They found a quiet, bitter satisfaction in watching Israel suffer. Obadiah knows far more about Elijah than he dares reveal. In the shadows, the hidden prophets speak of him with a quiet, desperate hope. They whisper stories of his miracles and unyielding courage. To these men, he is everything they wish they could be. To Obadiah, Elijah is a dangerous dream. The grueling strain of his double life is starting to show. He barely sleeps. Footsteps in the dark terrify him. He is too sick with worry to eat. Gray streaks his temples, aging him long before his time. Yet he keeps going. To stop now means watching good men starve, and he simply cannot let that happen. As the drought drags into its third year, Jezebel grows restless. She corners her servants, demanding to know where the missing palace rations are going. She looks for betrayal. When she passes Obadiah, her cold eyes linger too long. He forces a calm look, but his heart is a trapped bird beating wildly. Jezebel has ears everywhere. Merchants, soldiers, and even street beggars whisper secrets to her about any strange happenings in the distant villages. Fear poisons the air. Neighbors watch neighbors, and palace servants whisper, "Trust is a luxury no one can afford anymore." Yet God continues to shield Obadiah with a quiet, invisible hand. Time and again, Obadiah escapes by the skin of his teeth. Guards look away at crucial moments. Court meetings drag on, hiding his secret supply runs. Sudden dust storms force him to seek shelter near the caves. Deep in the dark, the 100 prophets pray constantly for their protector. They starve themselves, weeping, begging God to send rain to the scorched earth. They cry out for justice against the killers of the innocent. They beg God to remember his ancient covenant and bring Israel back home. On sleepless nights, Obadiah stares into the dark. How much longer? The caves are getting harder and harder to supply. Jezebel suspects everything. The prophets are growing restless. They want to step into the light and speak the truth. The pressure is building like a swollen river behind a cracking dam, but he won't quit. He has seen too much. He has watched ordinary, frightened men find a terrifying courage in the face of death. He has seen prayer keep men alive when the food ran out. He understands now that God works through our deepest weaknesses. The drought will eventually end, and Jezebel's bloody rule will fade into a forgotten memory.
But the story of 100 prophets saved by a single quiet man
Will echo through history forever. The God who sees the smallest sparrow hasn't forgotten those in the shadows. Morning breaks over the palace again, bone dry and cloudless, just as it has been for 3 long years. Obadiah rises to face another day of dangerous faithfulness. They depend on him. God has called him to this. Far across the border, Elijah is waiting. He holds the words that can save this dying nation. Now the long, dusty road back to Samaria lies open before him. The sun is brutal. Elijah walks through a ruined land scarred by 3 years of drought. The lush green fields are completely gone, replaced by dry, cracked clay that looks like shattered pottery. The cool mountain streams have vanished, leaving only rocky ravines. With every step, his boots kick up clouds of dust. His weathered face bears the deep, unmistakable marks of a long, lonely exile. Yet his eyes burn with a fierce focus that defies the heat. The time for hiding has finally come to an end. The confrontation is here. As he walks, he passes lines of desperate refugees fleeing toward neighboring lands. Families carry their few belongings in tied bundles. Barefoot children limp along, their soles hardened by miles of sharp rock. The elderly lean heavily on walking sticks, their faces hollow with misery. They stare at the wild prophet with eyes that have forgotten what hope looks like. A few recognize his face from stories whispered around dying campfires. Is this the man who cursed the land? The one who spoke doom over Israel and then vanished like mist. They watch him pass, gripped by a mixture of terror and hope. If he has the power to call down a curse, perhaps he can lift it too. Back in Samaria, King Ahab is growing frantic. Inside the royal stables, only a few hollow-eyed horses remain, their ribs showing through dusty coats. The palace gardens are dead. The royal fountains stand bone dry, choked with dust and dead leaves. The beautifully carved stone is a cruel mockery of water. Desperate Ahab summons his trusted governor, Obadiah. Ahab is completely spent, his sunken eyes ringed with black. His heavy royal robes hang loosely on a frame withered by raw stress. His crown looks too heavy for his graying head. Search the land Ahab commands, find every spring and valley. Find enough grass to keep our horses alive so we do not have to slaughter them. It shows just how low this kingdom has fallen. The king himself is begging for grass. Obadiah bows, accepting the task with a heavy, aching heart. He knows the secret. He knows where 100 prophets are hiding in dark caves, starving on scraps. He knows this dry spell lingers because Israel refuses to truly repent. Only the Lord can end what he started. To cover ground, they split up. King Ahab heads down one path while Obadiah takes the other. The irony of this moment runs deep. A king who turned his back on God searches for earthly fixes, while his loyal servant walks right into an unimaginable divine encounter. Before long, Obadiah spots a lone figure walking toward him. The silhouette wavers in the fierce heat, looking almost like a mirage on the baked stone. But as the traveler gets closer, recognition hits like a physical blow. The wild hair, the rough clothes, the heavy presence of authority mixed with deep humility. It can only be Elijah. The governor's first instinct is to turn and run. Running into Israel's most wanted fugitive out here feels like a dangerous trap. Yet the way the prophet walks toward him suggests this is no accident. No, this is a divine appointment. Elijah stops just a few paces away and is the first to speak. "Is that you, Obadiah?" The voice is surprisingly warm, with no trace of anger in his words. No accusation darkens his tone. He sounds like an old friend, not an enemy. Overwhelmed by respect and sheer terror, Obadiah falls flat on the dusty ground. "Yes, my lord, it is I." The words are barely a whisper. He cannot bear to look at the man who called down this terrible drought. Yet he cannot run from someone who so clearly serves the Lord he loves. "Go tell your master Elijah is here." The simple command sounds easy, but both men know exactly what it actually means. Telling King Ahab will instantly make Obadiah a suspect. Why was he talking to the kingdom's most wanted fugitive? How did he even recognize him out on this empty road? Terrified but honest, Obadiah asks, "What have I done wrong? Why are you handing me over to Ahab to be killed?" His voice trembles like a leaf. He knows the king's explosive temper all too well, and he knows Jezebel's cruelty is even worse. Any link to Elijah means death not just for him, but for his entire family. The loyal servant keeps talking, his words rushing out in a desperate stream, revealing a secret that genuinely stuns the prophet. "As surely as the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my master has not hunted for you." And whenever they claimed you were not there, he made them swear to it. The sheer scale of the manhunt takes Elijah by surprise. Ahab turned the hunt for a single prophet into a massive international issue, forcing foreign rulers to swear official oaths about your whereabouts. This terrible drought made finding Elijah an urgent royal crisis, stretching far beyond Israel's own borders. But Obadiah is not finished. His next words lay bare the secret he has protected with his very life. "I have worshipped the Lord since my youth. Haven't you heard what I did when Jezebel was slaughtering God's prophets? I hid 100 of them in 2 separate caves, 50 in each, keeping them alive with food and water." This revelation hits Elijah like a thunderbolt. While the prophet hid safely abroad, this official risked absolutely everything to keep God's servants alive right under the enemy's nose. While Elijah was fed by miracles, Obadiah was sharing his own food with men who otherwise would have starved to death. Elijah finally understands. He sees the immense courage it took for this man to live a double life for 3 long years. He realizes the faith needed to trust God in a place far more dangerous than his own exile. His voice softens with deep gratitude. "As the Lord Almighty lives whom I serve, I will present myself to Ahab today." The promise carries the weight of a divine oath. Elijah will not vanish again or leave Obadiah to face the king's fury alone. Today, the hiding ends. The confrontation begins. Obadiah nods slowly and heads back toward Samaria, carrying news that will shake the entire kingdom to its core. Behind him, Elijah prepares for the meeting that will decide the future of Israel. The stage is set for the greatest spiritual showdown in history. Mount Carmel rose above the parched hills like a green throne in a brown, dying land. Even in the grip of severe drought, its slopes held more life than the desolate plains below. Springs hidden in rocky cliffs still offered water to those who knew where to look. Trees with deep roots still offered shade. This mountain would become the stage for a divine showdown. Word of it spread like wildfire through the dry grass. Elijah was back. The prophet who brought the drought was calling for a massive gathering on Mount Carmel. All of Israel had to attend. The prophets of Baal and Asher had to be there. King Ahab himself would witness what happens when false gods face the living God of Israel. They came from every corner of the dying kingdom. Farmers abandoned their dusty fields, and merchants locked up their empty shops. Families packed what little they had to join the crowds streaming toward the mountain. Some hoped for rain, while others just wanted a spectacle. Everyone knew they were about to witness something that would change everything. Ahab arrived with all the grand display expected of a king, though his royal procession looked hollow and faded. Thin horses pulled his chariot, their ribs pressing sharply against dull, dusty coats. Soldiers marched in formation, but their uniforms hung loose after 3 years of starvation. The gold crown still glittered on Ahab's head, but the man beneath it looked exhausted after 3 years of torment. The 450 prophets of Baal arrived in their finest robes. They carried ceremonial knives and torches, looking completely confident. This was their moment to prove their God's power. 3 years of drought had only hardened their resolve to summon fire and rain. The prophets of Asher added another 400 to the false army. They brought carved poles and golden ornaments, polished to a blinding shine. Their voices filled the air with strange rhythmic chants of foreign lands and alien gods. Together, the false prophets outnumbered Elijah 850 to 1. But numbers fade when heaven chooses to act. The lone prophet stood before the massive crowd like David facing Goliath. His clothes smelled of wilderness and wind. His hair was wild. His eyes held a depth that made strong men look away. When he spoke, his voice rolled across the mountain like thunder before a storm. How long will you waver between two opinions? The question cut through the crowd like a blade through silk. If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. The challenge was absolutely clear. No more compromise, no more hedging bets. Choose today whom you will serve. But the people stayed as stolen as stones. They wanted rain. They wanted prosperity. They wanted peace. But they hated choosing between competing gods, because choice requires commitment, and commitment demands sacrifice. Sacrifice costs far more than most are willing to pay. Elijah waited, then spoke with patient authority. I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450. He acknowledged the odds, completely dismissing their importance. God plus one is always a majority when you stand in the center of heaven's will. The rules of the contest were simple enough. 2 bulls prepared for sacrifice. 2 altars would be built. 2 groups of prophets would beg their gods to send fire down from heaven. The God who answered with flame would prove he is real. Call on the name of your God, and I will call on the Lord, the God who answers by fire. He is God. The crowd roared in approval. This made sense to minds that understood raw demonstrations far better than complex doctrine. Let the gods compete. Let heaven reveal who deserved their allegiance. The prophets of Baal chose their bull and built their altar with elaborate dramatic ceremony. They laid the wood with exact precision. They carved the meat. They sprinkled sacred oils and muttered heavy rituals over everything. Everything had to be perfect for their God to respond. Then came the strangest prayer meeting in history. 450 prophets leaping around their altar, calling on Baal in desperation. Their voices rose in heavy chants that echoed off the cliffs. They leaped, they screamed, waving their arms toward a completely blank, cloudless sky. Morning bled into afternoon. Still no fire. The sun beat down mercilessly on the sweating, exhausted prophets. Raw voices rasped from calling. Legs stumbled after hours of dancing. Yet they kept pushing like men whose very lives depended on a response. Elijah watched their efforts with something close to pity. They were sincere men, but they were serving a lie. Their intense dedication deserved some respect, even if their theology was completely broken. But sincerity cannot replace truth. Dedication cannot cure delusion. At noon, the prophet of Israel began to mock them with sharp irony. Shout louder! Surely he is a god. Maybe he is busy thinking, or maybe he has gone traveling, or he is fast asleep and needs waking up. The words stung. They voiced the doubts growing in every heart. The false prophets whipped themselves into an absolute frenzy. They screamed until their voices completely cracked. They danced until they collapsed. They cut themselves with knives and spears until blood flowed like the rain they could not summon. The mountain slope looked like a living nightmare as hundreds of bleeding men collapsed in desperation. But the sky remained empty. No fire, no voice. No sign came to encourage them. Baal remained as silent as the carved stone he was. The afternoon wore on, offering nothing but the echo of their own cries. Finally, as evening drew near, their strength failed. They stood around their cold altar like defeated soldiers after a bloody battle. Blood stained their robes. Dust choked their faces. Despair pressed down on their shoulders like a physical weight. Their God had failed them completely. Now Elijah stepped forward. The crowd surged closer, sensing that the real moment had finally arrived. The prophet worked entirely alone, needing no help for what came next. He began repairing the broken altar of the Lord, 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Each one spoke of covenant promises that had survived despite human faithlessness. Every rock told a story of God's loyalty across generations of wandering. The altar rose slowly, built by steady hands that trusted heaven's timing. He arranged the wood. The bull was prepared. Everything looked ready for a normal sacrifice. But then Elijah did something that made the crowd gasp. He ordered 4 large jars of water to be poured over the meat and the wood. Water, precious life-giving water, in a land parched by 3 years of drought. The crowd watched in absolute shock as their most precious resource soaked the wood and meat. 3 times he ordered them to do it. 12 jars of water vanished into the wood until everything dripped with the liquid they desperately craved. Lighting this by natural means was now impossible. Wet wood does not burn. Soaked meat will not ignite. Water pooled all around the altar, filling a trench dug for this exact purpose. If fire came now, it had to come from heaven. Then Elijah prayed. No dancing, no screaming, no cutting, no elaborate ceremony or religious theater. He simply spoke to God like a man talking to a close friend. Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant acting on your command. Answer me, Lord. Answer me. Hear me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back. The prayer lasted less than a minute. No repeating words, no jargon, no drama. Just an honest conversation between heaven and earth. Elijah asked for fire to show God's love for a lost people, not his own power. Then it happened. Fire fell from heaven like lightning, controlled, blinding, and purposeful. It completely consumed the bull. Wood, stone, and even the dust around the altar vanished. The fire drank up the water like oil. Within seconds, nothing remained but scorched earth. The people fell flat on their faces as one. A cold terror and fierce worship tangled deep inside them like oil and water. A single roar tore from thousands of throats. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. The words shook the mountain and rumbled across the valley like heavy thunder. Baal's prophets stood frozen. Their God was utterly beaten. Everything lay in ruins. A dark, terrifying future lay ahead of them. Elijah barked orders demanding that absolutely nobody escape. Blood was the price for leading Israel astray. The false prophets were executed by the sword near the Kishon River. Their blood soaked the ground that had not seen rain for 3 years. It was a brutal end, but a deep rot requires a sharp blade. The nation had to be cured, no matter the cost. With the sun sinking behind Mount Carmel, the people turned back home deeply changed. They had witnessed the absolute uselessness of their fake gods. They had felt the raw strength of the living God. Above all, they now knew heaven still cared deeply about stubborn, wayward Israel. The fire had fallen. The false prophets were gone. The choice was clear. Only one thing was left. Rain had to fall to seal the victory, and heal the dusty land. Blackened altar stones still smoldered. Smoke drifted across Mount Carmel as the last flames died, leaving everyone waiting for a cloud. The crowd had seen something impossible. Blazing fire from heaven. God's instant answer to Elijah's quiet prayer. Now the prophet looked toward a different miracle. 3 years of drought had broken the land, leaving deep cracks stretching in every direction. Wells were bone dry. Streams had turned to dust. Starving herds wandered looking for water that wasn't there. Elijah's drought was absolute, but God had spoken. It was time for rain. Elijah began climbing higher up the mountain, his servant's footsteps echoing right behind him on the stones. They reached a high ridge overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. Endless, calm blue water stretched out all the way to the horizon, not a single cloud in sight. Elijah told his servant to go look toward the sea. The young man shielded his eyes and stared west at empty, endless water. Absolutely nothing moved. The servant reported that there was nothing. Elijah knelt, bending low with his face pressed between his knees. This was the ancient posture of intense prayer. The prophet who had just called down fire was now begging for rain, sending his servant back to watch 7 times. 7 times the report was identical. Nothing. Just clear skies and endless blue, without a hint of change. But the 7th time was different. The servant climbed up yet again, scanning the horizon. Far out over the sea, a tiny speck caught his eye. A small, barely visible white smudge against the blue. He shouted back that he saw a tiny cloud no bigger than a man's hand. Elijah looked up. Just one cloud, a mere whisper of moisture. But Elijah knew exactly what it meant. Snapping to his feet with sudden energy, he ordered his servant to run to Ahab and tell him to prepare his chariot. He had to get down the mountain before the downpour trapped him. As the servant raced off, Elijah watched that tiny white speck begin to swell. What started as a wisp soon became a thick mass, spreading until it covered the sky. The wind picked up. The air grew heavy and moisture gathered thick. In minutes, heavy, dark storm clouds rolled in off the sea. Thunder rumbled in the distance while lightning flickered across the sky. The scent of rain filled the air. King Ahab didn't need another warning. He had seen the fire fall and knew Elijah spoke for God. Horses were quickly hitched to the royal chariot. The king climbed aboard with reins in hand. Then came the first fat, warm drops, hitting the dry soil with tiny puffs of dust. Then came more drops, faster and heavier. The drought was breaking. But as Ahab raced down the mountain road, something unbelievable happened. A figure appeared right beside his chariot, running at the exact speed of the horses. It was Elijah keeping pace as the rain started to pour. With his robes tucked into his belt, to run, free water streamed down his face, while lightning split the sky and thunder crashed overhead. Ahab's horses were strong and fast wheels spinning in the mud. Yet Elijah matched their frantic speed, step for step, mile after mile. Supernatural power surged through the prophet's legs. They raced side by side through the storm as the rain fell harder by the second. The drought became an absolute deluge. Water rushed down hillsides, filling dry creek beds until they overflowed. The parched land drank deeply after 3 years of thirst. Elijah ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. 18 miles of sprinting through a thunderstorm. He reached the city gates before the king, an impossible feat of endurance powered by God. The rain kept falling through the night, a steady soaking downpour that worked deep into the soil. Farmers would wake to find their fields turning green once more. Wells would fill up, springs would flow, and the curse of drought was finally lifted. From a single small cloud to a massive storm, from 3 years of dryness to a deluge. God's timing was perfect. his promise completely delivered. Elijah knew how to read God's signs. A tiny cloud meant a flood was coming, a reminder that small beginnings often lead to massive endings. Faith sees the storm in a tiny wisp of vapor. The prophet, who once hid by a drying brook, was now running through a torrent, watching God's power in motion. Every stride through the storm declared absolute trust. Rain washed clean the heights of Mount Carmel and filled the dry streams of Gilead once more. The wilderness turned green again. 3 years of drought washed away in a single afternoon. God's promise to his prophet was completely fulfilled. In Jezreel, Elijah finally stopped running, bone-tired but victorious. Rain poured down around him like a blessing. The long, cruel drought was over. New life was starting, but Jezebel's threat loomed. Rain drummed on the palace roof in Jezreel. King Ahab sat inside, water still dripping from his clothes. That wild descent from Mount Carmel had left him thoroughly shaken. Fire from heaven, torrential rain from nowhere. Elijah's God was clearly far stronger than Baal. Ahab was just staring into space when his wife found him. Queen Jezebel walked in, commanding as always, and saw his shattered face immediately. "What happened on the mountain?" she demanded. Slowly, Ahab started to speak. The showdown. The 850 prophets of Baal and Asher, the wild dancing, the self-mutilation. Complete silence from their gods. Then came Elijah's quiet prayer, and fire swallowed it all. Every last prophet. Jezebel's voice turned to ice. "All of them," Ahab whispered. The crowd slaughtered them by the brook. They kept shouting that the Lord is God over and over. Jezebel's face turned to stone. In just one afternoon, her entire religious empire collapsed. Years spent building up the worship of Baal, wiped out in seconds. Her imported prophets lay dead. A ragged wilderness preacher had challenged her crown. Shaking with rage, she summoned a messenger. "Find this Elijah," she ordered. "Tell him that by this time tomorrow, he will be just as dead as my prophets. I swear it on my gods." With that, the rider galloped into the storm. The messenger tracked Elijah down in Jezreel, still catching his breath after that wild run. The prophet listened as the queen's threat was delivered, a death sentence, plain and simple. Jezebel had the power to do it too. Armies marched at her word. She ruled the courts. She had butchered prophets before without blinking. But then something broke inside Elijah. Pure fear crept into his soul. This was not a holy awe of God, but raw, paralyzing human terror. The man who just stood down hundreds of false prophets now shook at the thought of one woman's wrath. Maybe it was the crushing fatigue, the years of hiding, that brutal showdown on the peak, or the supernatural sprint through the pouring rain. Both his body and soul were totally empty. With his defenses down, he simply could not stand his ground. He stood up and started walking. He did not head toward the palace, nor did he seek shelter with the cheering crowds. Instead, he plunged straight into the desert, running from everything. Confused by this sudden flight, his servants scrambled to keep up. They walked through the rainy night, putting miles behind them before dawn. The man who outran a chariot was now fleeing like a thief. When they reached Beersheba, deep in Judah, Elijah decided to leave his loyal companion behind. "Stay here," he muttered. No explanation, no return plan, just a man walking alone into the empty void. Ahead lay nothing but rocky ridges and dry thorns. It was a barren land of silence and isolation. Elijah pushed deeper into the waste, carrying nothing but his dread. Under a lone broom tree, he found a patch of shade. Not much shelter, but enough to make him finally stop. Collapsing under the thin branches, he felt totally broken. The massive victory on Mount Carmel felt pointless. Falling fire from heaven had not softened Jezebel's icy heart. Even God's rain had not brought peace. A single threat had shattered everything. "I have had enough," Lord Elijah prayed. "Please, just take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." He was finished. The fearless champion who had stopped the rain and summoned fire. He only wanted to die under a scrubby bush in the middle of nowhere. Elijah lay back in the thin shade and closed his eyes. Exhaustion pulled him under instantly, but his story was not over. God was not finished with his prophet yet. The same Lord who sent ravens with food and kept him alive through the drought would not abandon him now. Help was already on the way, unseen by the sleeping prophet. Grace was close, even if he felt only heavy darkness. Out in the silent desert, mercy was preparing to speak. The whisper at Horeb was coming. But for now, sleep brought him no peace. He lay under the broom tree, haunted by Jezebel's fury. His body ached from the brutal run south, and his spirit felt entirely crushed by failure and fear. Then a hand touched his shoulder, gentle but firm, shaking him awake. "Get up and eat," a voice told him. Elijah slowly opened his eyes. An angel was standing there, looking kind but solemn. Right by his head was fresh bread, still warm, along with a jar of cool, clean water. He sat up slowly, aching all over. His legs still shook, and his throat felt like dust, but the smell of warm bread made his stomach rumble. Eating in silence, he was thankful for the meal. When he finished, he slipped right back into a deep, dreamless sleep under the stars. The angel watched over him. Once more, the messenger touched his shoulder. "Get up and eat," the voice commanded gently. "The road is too long for you alone." More warm bread lay waiting, and the water jar was full again. Elijah ate, feeling strength return. This heavenly food tasted better than anything he had ever known. Every bite restored his body. Yet the words puzzled him. What journey? He had come to this wasteland to die, not to travel further. But as his body healed, he realized God had plans reaching far past his despair. Standing up, he started walking again, but with a strange new purpose. His path took him south and east, cutting through deep ravines and climbing rugged ridges. They walked past ancient trails worn smooth over the centuries. For 40 days and 40 nights, he traveled completely fueled by that heavenly bread. Hunger never weakened him, nor did thirst slow his stride. God's provision carried him through the deep wastes. Slowly the landscape shifted, revealing giant rocky peaks ahead. This was holy ground, the very place where Moses received the law. Mount Horeb, also known as C, the holy mountain of God. Elijah climbed the steep paths. Here Moses saw the burning bush and carried down the tablets of stone. This was where God had revealed his glory and spoken his own name. If any place held answers for a broken man, it was here. High up, he found a cave that offered cold shelter. He could wait here. He could listen. Maybe here God would finally explain why it all went wrong. As darkness fell, the word of the Lord reached him. There was no grand vision or thunderous voice, just a simple question. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" The prophet spilled his heart out like a rushing flood. Years of frustration, confusion, failure, and fear came pouring out. "I have been incredibly zealous for the Lord God Almighty," he began. "But Israel has broken your covenant, smashed your altars, and slaughtered your prophets with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." All his work felt entirely lost. The people had seen miracles, but they still worshipped other gods. The fire on Carmel was a memory after just one day. He felt entirely alone in his devotion. Then God commanded him, "Go out and stand on the mountain. I am about to pass by." Elijah stepped out onto a rocky ledge. The desert night was calm and completely still. Stars shone brightly in the clear sky. Quiet wrapped around the peak. Suddenly the earth began to tear. A violent shaking split massive rocks, sending stones crashing down the dark slopes. A screaming wind tore through next, snapping trees and howling in the canyons. Then came a roaring fire, lighting up the deep darkness. But the Lord was not in any of these grand displays. The shaking stopped. The gale died down. The flames faded. Silence returned. A deep, absolute quiet took hold, holding its breath. And right there in the stillness came a gentle whisper, soft as a sigh, a still, small voice speaking clearer than any thunderstorm. Elijah knew this was God. Not in the loud spectacles he expected, but in the soft murmur touching his heart. He covered his face with his cloak and walked to the cave entrance. The voice asked again, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" The prophet offered the same reply. His despair remained, and he still felt utterly alone. But something had changed inside. The quiet whisper reached deeper than any earthquake ever could. God offered perspective to his pain. Elijah was not alone. 7,000 in Israel had never bowed to Baal. True believers he had never even met. Hidden souls who still worshiped the true God. And Elijah's mission was far from over. 3 massive tasks lay ahead. He had kings to anoint a successor to groom, and justice to unleash. Heaven's plan would move forward with or without his full understanding. Silence taught him what no storm could. Divine strength often moves in pure silence. The greatest wonders happen without any fanfare. A still, small voice does more than a violent earthquake. Elijah walked away a changed man, not transformed by spectacular sights, but by a quiet whisper. He found presence, not just answers. Sometimes the softest breath carries the heaviest weight. Enter Elisha, a simple farmer. Morning light crept across the fields of Abel-Maholah. 12 teams of oxen marched across the fertile soil, each pair led by a different worker. Spring plowing was underway, breaking ground for the next harvest. Elisha guided the very last, team hands gripping the wooden plow. Sweat dripped from his brow as the oxen pulled hard against the stubborn earth. It was beautiful, rich ground. His family had worked this dirt for generations, and the young man knew every acre like the back of his hand. He knew where the winter rains pooled, and which slopes grew the thickest wheat. Farming was in his blood, passed down from father to son like a sacred trust. His father, Shaphat, was a wealthy landowner. 12 teams of oxen meant serious riches back then. Each pair took years of careful breeding and training to perfect. Honest sweat and smart planning brought them great success. Elisha grew up with soil under his fingernails and thick calluses on his palms. He lived by the rhythm of the seasons, knowing when to plant, when to reap, and how to read the clouds. The earth spoke to him in a language he knew by heart. But this morning, everything was about to change. A lone figure appeared at the edge of the property, walking directly toward the teams. The laborers noticed first, pointing and whispering to one another. Strangers rarely wandered out this far. But as the figure drew closer, Elisha froze. Everyone in the land knew that face, the wild hair and the coarse, rough clothes. It was Elijah the Tishbite, the legendary prophet who had called down fire from heaven. He marched straight toward Elisha, his eyes locked on him with absolute purpose. He held a tattered cloak, weathered from years on the road. This was the mantle, the ultimate symbol of his divine authority and calling. Without saying a word, Elijah draped the cloak over Elisha's shoulders. The coarse fabric fell heavily, wrapping the young farmer in a brand new destiny. Then, just as quietly, Elijah spun around and walked away. No long explanation, no instructions. Only the cloak remained, carrying an unmistakable message, a summons to leave everything behind and serve God. Elisha stood absolutely frozen. The oxen stopped feeling their master's sudden distraction. Nearby, the other workers abandoned their plows to stare. Time itself seemed to stop. Elisha looked at his beasts, his beautiful fields, and then at Elijah's disappearing figure. His comfortable past and wild future pulled him in opposite directions. The choice was entirely his. "Wait!" Elisha yelled, sprinting after the prophet with the heavy cloak streaming behind him. When he caught up, he made a simple human request. "Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, and then I will follow you." Elijah's answer sounded harsh at first. "Go back. What have I done to you?" But he was testing the young man, probing the depth of his commitment. Elisha knew this was a question of priorities, not permission. Taking up the mantle demanded absolute, unconditional surrender. Half-hearted souls would never survive what was coming. The young farmer walked back to his team, but not to resume plowing. He unhitched his beasts. The other workers watched in pure shock as Elisha grabbed his wooden plow and yoke, smashing them to pieces. The sturdy wood that had served him for years became kindling. He slaughtered his prize oxen using the broken tools as fuel to cook the meat. The rich scent brought neighbors running from nearby fields. Word spread fast, Shaphat's son was throwing a massive feast. People gathered, wondering about the sudden party. Elisha handed out the freshly cooked meat to everyone. This was more than just a dinner. This was a total declaration. The young farmer was burning his bridges, destroying any chance of returning to his old life. As the fire died down, Elisha turned his back on everything he had ever known. The fields he plowed, the wealthy inheritance, the comfortable, safe life of a farmer. He followed Elijah straight into the unknown, with no promise of shelter or food. There was no promise of safety or success. Only the call of God and the mentor who would teach him to hear that silent voice. Behind them, Elisha's old life cooled in the evening ashes. Ahead lay brutal trials he could barely imagine. The farmer was now an apprentice. The cloak Elijah threw now belonged entirely to Elisha. Not just the heavy wool, but everything it represented. Authority weight. A life spent straining for God's whisper and shouting his truth to a world that hated listening. From that day on, Elisha served Elijah faithfully. He watched, learned, and prepared for the day the master's mantle would become his forever. Then came Naboth's vineyard. King Ahab walked through his palace gardens in Samaria. Heavy fruit bent the branches of trees lining the stone pathways. Manicured flower beds bloomed in neat, perfect rows. But Ahab's eyes kept drifting past his palace walls. Right next door sat a small vineyard, ancient, deep-rooted, and bursting with green life. The location was perfect, right on his border. Ahab had watched it hungrily during his daily walks. The land belonged to a Jezreelite named Naboth. It was ancestral ground. His family had tended those very vines for generations. He knew every vine, raised them with his father's secrets. But Ahab wanted it and made an offer. He approached Naboth with what seemed like a fair deal. "Give me your vineyard," the king said. "I want to turn it into a vegetable garden since it borders my palace. I will trade you a better vineyard somewhere else, or if you want, I will pay you cash for whatever it is worth." By any standard, it was fair. Good cash or better land. Anyone else would have jumped at it, but Naboth refused him flat out. "The Lord forbid that I should ever give you the inheritance of my ancestors." This was not about money or real estate. To Naboth, this vineyard was holy, a sacred trust handed down through generations. It was the sacred bond between God's people and the dirt under their feet. Under the law of Moses, ancestral land stayed in the tribe. It could never be sold off permanently. Even if poverty forced a temporary sale, the year of Jubilee would always return that soil to its original family. Naboth was not just being difficult or greedy. He was standing on the laws of God. The vineyard was never his to sell, not even to a king. Ahab slunk back to his palace, brooding and furious. A commoner had told him no, and his pride was bleeding. A monarch who ruled armies and raised cities could not get a single patch of dirt from a local farmer. He threw himself onto his bed and stared at the wall. Like a petulant child denied a toy, the king went on a hunger strike. Servants brought him plates, but he waved them off. Israel's ruler was pouting over grapes. Jezebel found him whimpering. "Why won't you eat?" Ahab whined. About Naboth, the vineyard, and the deal that fell through. He complained about the generous offer and Naboth's stubborn talk of religious laws. Jezebel listened, her temper rising with every word. His weakness disgusted her. In Sidon, kings took what they wanted from peasants. "Is this how you govern Israel?" she mocked. "Get up and eat," she told him. "Pull yourself together. I will hand you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite." While the king sulked, Jezebel went to work. She forged letters in Ahab's name, stamping them with the royal seal. Her plot was simple and lethal. The orders went directly to the elders of Naboth's city. They called a public fast, pretending to seek God. Naboth was given a seat of honor before the crowd. Then 2 local thugs would act as false witnesses, publicly accusing Naboth of cursing God and the king, blasphemy, and high treason. Under the law, both meant death. The trap was set, and the townspeople gathered exactly as ordered. Naboth took his seat of honor completely blind to the snare. Right on cue, the 2 hired liars stood up and pointed their fingers. "Naboth has cursed both God and the king," they shouted. The crowd erupted in fury. Speaking against God was the ultimate sin. Cursing the king was treason. Both carried the death penalty. They dragged Naboth past the city gates and pelted him with stones until he died. No real trial, no defense. Just bloodthirsty mob justice built on a lie. An innocent man died for his heritage. Word of Naboth's death reached Jezebel. She hurried to Ahab, gloating. "Get up and take the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. The land he refused to sell is yours now. He is dead." Ahab jumped from his bed, his energy instantly restored. The dark cloud lifted, and his appetite returned. He dressed quickly and walked out to claim his prize. But as Ahab stepped into Naboth's vineyard, a tall, wild-haired figure stepped out from the shadows. Elijah stood there like an avenging angel. "Have you found me, my enemy?" Ahab whispered. "I have found you," the prophet replied, "because you have sold yourself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord." God's sentence fell like a hammer. Ahab's entire dynasty was finished. Dogs would lick Ahab's blood on the exact spot where Naboth bled out. Jezebel would face a worse end, torn apart by wild dogs outside Jezreel. The coveted vineyard would stand as a monument of divine vengeance. The vines Ahab lusted after would be watered by tears of judgment. His cheap victory had sealed his doom. Naboth died protecting his inheritance, but his blood was crying out from the soil for justice. And the God who sees every sparrow fall heard that cry. 3 years went by in uneasy peace. There was no confrontation between Ahab and the prophet who cursed him. Ahab likely hoped the doom would fade with time. That delay might help him escape. But God does not keep human time. Delayed justice is not denied justice. Soon war clouds gathered on Israel's borders. Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, had rebuilt his strength. His armies were fully mobilized and ready to seize back the land lost in previous battles. The goal was clear: Ramoth Gilead east of the Jordan. King Jehoshaphat of Judah came north to visit. Careful diplomacy and royal marriages kept peace between the kingdoms. Now Ahab saw an opportunity to strengthen their bond through shared military action. "Will you fight with me at Ramoth Gilead?" Ahab asked his ally. Jehoshaphat agreed. "I am with you. My people are your people. My horses are your horses." The pact was sealed. Two kingdoms would march together against their common enemy. But Jehoshaphat wanted God's guidance before any big decision. "Seek the Lord's counsel," he urged. So Ahab summoned his prophets, 400 men who claimed to speak for God, but served the royal court instead of heaven. Their message was unanimous and loud. "Go up to Ramoth Gilead and be victorious," they chanted. "The Lord will hand it over." Yet their easy optimism troubled Jehoshaphat. True prophets usually clashed and questioned royal plans. But these courtmen seemed way too eager to please. "Is there no actual prophet of the Lord we can ask?" Jehoshaphat pressed. Ahab's face darkened. "There is still one man who might hear from God, but I hate him. He never prophesies anything good for me, only ruin. He is Micaiah, son of Imlah." Reluctantly, Ahab sent for the outlaw prophet. While they waited, the 400 court prophets carried on their show, one even waving iron horns. He gored the air to show how Israel would crush Syria. Then Micaiah arrived under guard, clearly no friend of the court. The messenger who brought him whispered some friendly advice. "Look, every other prophet is predicting total success for the king. Make sure your word agrees with theirs." But Micaiah shook his head. "As surely as the Lord lives, I will say only what the Lord tells me." Standing before the two kings, Micaiah initially seemed to agree with the crowd, but his dripping sarcasm gave him away. Forced to speak honestly, he delivered the real vision I saw: Israel scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd. And the Lord said, "These people have no master. Let them go home in peace." The prophet saw the bloody truth. Ahab would not survive this. His army would shatter. The shepherd king would fall, leaving his people defenseless. Ahab glared at him, furious. "Did I not tell you he never prophesies good for me, only ruin?" Ahab snapped. But Micaiah was not finished. He described a vision of God's throne room where a lying spirit was sent to deceive Ahab's prophets. The sweet promises were actually a divine trap. "Throw this man in prison," Ahab barked. "Feed him nothing but bread and water until I return." Micaiah's parting words hung heavy in the air. "If you ever return in peace, the Lord has not spoken through me." Still, both kings prepared for battle. Their armies marched east, toward Ramoth Gilead. Chariots, cavalry, and infantry with spears, a massive force, easily capable of taking back one contested border city. But Ahab took precautions. Maybe Micaiah's words had rattled him more than he cared to admit. He decided to disguise himself in the coming fight. He stripped off his royal armor, blending in as a common soldier. Jehoshaphat, however, kept his kingly robes on. The battle erupted around the walls of Ramoth Gilead. Syrian and Israelite forces clashed with sword and spear as chariots wheeled and charged. Arrows rained down. The Syrian king had given his chariot commanders one specific order: do not waste time fighting anyone else. Target only the king of Israel. Kill him, and the war is over. When the Syrian chariots saw Jehoshaphat in his royal robes, they assumed he was their man. They closed in, weapons raised for the kill. But when Jehoshaphat screamed a battle cry, the Syrians realized their mistake. Wrong king. Meanwhile, Ahab's disguise seemed to work. Hidden among the rank and file, he was safe from any targeted strike. It was a perfect plan except for one arrow shot by a Syrian archer. The bowman was not aiming at anyone special. He just pulled his bow and let fly into the crowd. A random shot in the chaos of war. But God guides even stray arrows. The arrow found a tiny gap where the plates of Ahab's armor met. It slipped right between the joints of bronze and leather, driving deep into his exposed flesh. Ahab knew instantly the wound was fatal. Warm blood pooled quickly. It flooded his chariot floor. But the battle was raging, and retreating would cause a panic. "Turn the chariot," he choked out to his driver. "Get me out of the fight, I am hurt." They slipped toward the rear, but the king could not fully retreat. His troops still needed to see him. So Ahab propped himself up in his chariot, blood draining from his body, watching his men fight on. The battle raged all day. Hour by hour, Ahab grew weaker. By sunset, the king of Israel was dead. The shepherd had fallen just as Micaiah said. The news swept through the ranks. Every man to his own town, every man to his country. The army scattered. They carried Ahab back to Samaria. Royal honors for a king who sold his soul for a vineyard. When they washed his chariot at Samaria's pool, dogs licked his blood. The exact spot where Naboth's blood had cried out for justice. Elijah's prophecy was fulfilled to the letter. Divine justice found its mark just like that random arrow. The palace in Samaria felt empty without King Ahab. Now his son, Ahaziah, sat on Israel's throne, but the crown weighed heavily on young shoulders. The new king lacked his father's sharp instincts and military grit. Ahaziah had inherited more than just royal power. He also took on his parents' devotion to foreign gods. Baal worship continued under his reign, encouraged by the queen mother Jezebel, who still held massive power in the court. Trouble also brewed beyond the borders. Moab, a long-time tribute vassal, sensed weakness in the transition of power and rebelled against Israelite control, choking off a massive source of royal income. Other neighbors watched closely, waiting for more signs of weakness. But trouble at home would prove far more lethal than any foreign threat. In Samaria, the upper chambers of the royal palace were designed for quiet comfort. Large windows caught the cool breezes during the sweltering summer. Elegant lattice work kept the rooms private, while letting the air flow through. Ahaziah was walking through his private quarters one afternoon when disaster struck without warning. Maybe he leaned too heavily against a window. Perhaps the lattice work had rotted over time. Whatever happened, the screen suddenly gave way. The king fell through the broken lattice, crashing onto the stone floor below. The impact was brutal, shattering bones and causing deep internal damage. Servants rushed to his side, but it was bad. Ahaziah was hovering between life and death. Stranded in bed, unable to move without screaming in agony, the young king began to worry about his soul. Who could heal wounds this deep? Which God held the ultimate power over life and death? Instead of crying out to the Lord God of Israel, Ahaziah leaned into his family's dark pagan traditions. He decided to consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron. This Philistine idol was famous for predicting recovery from sickness. "Go and consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron." Ahaziah commanded his messengers, "Ask if I will ever recover from this injury." The mission seemed simple enough. Ride to the Philistine city of Ekron. Ask the priests of Baal-zebub if the king will live. Return with whatever answer the idol gives. These messengers had run similar errands for the crown dozens of times, but this specific journey would not go according to plan. They left Samaria and headed southwest toward the Philistine border. The road was heavily traveled, packed with merchants and diplomats moving between the kingdoms. They anticipated an easy trip. But as they marched along the main highway, a lone figure stepped out ahead of them. Tall, fierce, with wild hair and coarse clothing, the unmistakable look of a wilderness prophet. It was Elijah the Tishbite. The prophet stood right in the middle of the road, blocking their path to Ekron. His presence demanded instant respect. Even royal messengers knew better than to cross him. "Is it because there is no God in Israel that you are going to consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron?" Elijah demanded. The question cut straight to the core of Israel's spiritual decay. A nation that once saw fire fall from heaven was now begging foreign idols for answers. The same people who saw rain return after 3 years of terrible drought were seeking hope from Philistine idols. Elijah's final message for King Ahaziah was brutal.
This is what the Lord says: you will never get out of the bed you are lying in. You will surely die. The messengers froze. They had their prophecy, but not from the God they set out to ask. Should they keep pushing on to Ekron or turn back to the palace right away? The prophet's authority was terrifying. Without saying another word, Elijah spun around and vanished. The guards watched him disappear, then traded worried glances. God himself had just intercepted their mission. There was only one choice: head back to Samaria. The walk back felt twice as long as the journey out. How could they possibly deliver this news to their dying king? How would Ahaziah react to such a curse? When they walked into his chamber far earlier than expected, the injured king gasped. "Why are you back so soon?" The messengers confessed everything. A man had intercepted them on the highway, claiming to speak for the Lord God of Israel. And his message was terrifying. The king was never going to get out of bed. What did this man look like? Ahaziah demanded, his voice shaking. The messengers gave a precise description. He wore a garment of coarse hair with a thick leather belt cinched around his waist. Instant recognition hit the king. Ahaziah knew exactly who had stopped them. It was Elijah the Tishbite, the same prophet who had terrorized his father Ahab for decades. The man who called down fire and stopped the rain for 3 years. The voice of doom who had cursed his entire family line. Inside the young king's chest, cold fear and hot rage warred for control. Part of him shuddered, knowing Elijah's prophecies always came true. But royal pride demanded he fight back. No wild desert preacher was going to dictate terms to the king of Israel. Ahaziah ordered a show of force. If Elijah wanted to challenge the throne, he would face the consequences. The king summoned his officers and gave them a direct command. "Send an officer with 50 soldiers to arrest him," he snarled. "Drag Elijah back to pay for his interference." The squad marched out of Samaria with total confidence. 50 fully armed soldiers seemed like overkill for one wandering hermit. The captain was a battle-hardened officer who had handled much tougher missions. This felt like a routine arrest. They spotted Elijah sitting quietly on top of a steep hill, completely unfazed by their approach. The prophet did not even flinch as the soldiers surrounded his position. He watched their tactical formation with the cold patience of a man who already knew how this would end. The captain marched halfway up the slope and yelled his order, "Man of God, the king demands that you come down." Elijah's response was ice cold. "If I am indeed a man of God, let fire fall from heaven and burn you and your 50 men to ash." Instantly, fire fell. Not a slow heat that gave them a chance to run, but a blinding flash of pure fury that vaporized all 51 men in a heartbeat. The hillside was left charred and smoking. Dead silence reclaimed the barren wilderness. Word of the disaster rushed back to King Ahaziah. 50 elite soldiers erased in a second. And the prophet was still sitting there completely untouched. The throne had been challenged and utterly humiliated. But Ahaziah's rage only intensified. Maybe the first officer had been too arrogant. Perhaps a different approach would yield a different result. The king sent 50 more soldiers under a new commander, hoping a respectful tone might work. "Man of God, this is the king's order. Come down right now." Elijah's voice remained flat. "If I really am a man of God, let fire fall from heaven and consume you and your 50 men." Again, fire fell from heaven. In a single breath, 51 more soldiers were gone. Fresh scorch marks scarred the hill, a grim proof
of power. 2 entire military units had been wiped out by the exact man they were ordered to arrest. Meanwhile, back in Samaria, the king heard about this second disaster with growing dread. 102 soldiers dead. His army was bleeding men, and his throne was being openly mocked by a force he couldn't fight. And yet, Ahaziah refused to yield. Pride kept him from backing down. A third captain received orders to arrest Elijah, knowing it was likely a death sentence. But this commander was smarter than the other 2. When he reached the hill where Elijah waited, he threw away all arrogance. He crawled up the dirt and dropped to his knees. "Man of God," he begged, "please spare my life and the lives of these 50 men who serve you." Look, fire fell from heaven and burned up the first 2 captains and their troops. "Please, just spare me." His words showed he knew exactly what Elijah could do. No demands, no threats from the palace, just a desperate plea from a soldier who knew he was standing before the spokesman of God. The angel of the Lord whispered to Elijah, "Go down with him, do not be afraid." So for the very first time, the prophet stood up and walked down the hill. He walked quietly with the troops, no longer a target, but a guest. They had arrived to arrest him, but now they escorted him like a king. When they reached the palace, they led Elijah straight into the bedroom of King Ahaziah. The injured king lay propped up on pillows, pale and shivering from his wounds. Standing right over him, Elijah delivered the exact same warning his messengers had received before. Only this time the words carried a terrifying weight, spoken by the very man who had just called down fire twice in one day. This is what the Lord says. "Is there no God in Israel that you had to send messengers to consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Because you did this, you will never get out of that bed. You are going to die." And the prophecy came true, word for word. Ahaziah never recovered from his fall through the wooden lattice. He died in that very bed, having ruled Israel for only 2 short years. Since Ahaziah had no sons, his brother Joram took the throne. The bloodline of Ahab survived, but a dark shadow of judgment hung over them, destined to destroy the whole family. Once again, God proved that He alone controls life and death. Fake gods were useless when real disaster struck. Only the Lord had the power to heal, and only He decided who lived or died. Fire fell, and Ahaziah died, just as Elijah said he would. His brother Joram inherited the crown along with all the brewing tension with that wild prophet from Gilead. The new king had watched his brother die. He knew exactly what kind of power Elijah possessed. Yet political pressure forced him to act anyway. The palace hallways buzzed with gossip about why the prophet was still walking free. Army generals muttered that they looked weak. How could they rule if a wild prophet could kill royal soldiers without any consequences? A few advisors urged caution. They remembered what happened to the last king's men. No regular army could fight fire from heaven. Maybe the smart move was to simply leave Elijah alone, but others demanded blood. The prophet could not be allowed to keep undermining the palace. If one man got away with defying the crown, others would join him. The monarchy itself was at stake. Joram was caught right in the middle. Half of him was terrified of Elijah's power, while the other half felt forced to act like a king. His choice on what to do with Elijah would define his entire reign. In the end, the new king decided to test the prophet one more time. Maybe Ahaziah's death had already settled the score. Maybe things had changed and he would get a different result. He ordered another military mission, but with a new tactic. Instead of a small squad, they would send a much larger force. Instead of shouting demands, they would try to rush him and take him by force. Surely numbers would succeed where others had failed. Another captain of 50 received his orders with clear dread. He knew all about the scorched hills and the ash that used to be soldiers. No sane officer would take this job. But you do not say no to a king.
The company marched out of Samaria terrified. 50 brave men walking straight toward their own execution. They dragged their feet every mile, bringing them closer to a fight none of them wanted. They spotted Elijah right where they expected, sitting calmly on the hillside, looking out over the valley. He looked completely relaxed, like he already knew they were on their way. His face showed zero fear. The captain stepped forward, trying to look brave, but failing. He tried to sound like a royal officer, but his shaking voice gave him away. "Man of God," he called out. "The king says to come down." It was the same demand that had killed the last two captains. The same fatal mistake that brought fire from heaven before, but maybe this time would be different. Elijah's answer, however, remained exactly the same. No change in his voice, no compromise. Just God-like certainty meeting human pride. "If I really am a man of God," the prophet declared, "let fire fall from heaven and burn you and your 50 men to ash." Instantly, white-hot fire fell from the sky, offering no escape and no time to scream. The third squad vanished into smoke. Like the ones before them, the black soot on the hillside proved that God's power had not faded at all. King Joram got the news at his palace. Complete desperation. 3 companies wiped out 153 soldiers dead. The kingdom's fighting force was crumbling, slowly broken by the prayers of just one man. Yet the young king refused to back down. Pride and politics forced his hand. He had to keep going. Maybe a different tactic would work. Maybe sheer numbers could somehow outlast God's power. He ordered a 4th expedition. This time a whole company would march, but with very different orders. No more demanding surrender. They would surround the prophet using sheer strategy. The new captain was chosen for his sharp mind and years of combat. If anyone stood a chance where the others had failed, this man was their last hope. He studied the previous disasters, hunting for any lesson to avoid another slaughter. Once the men were armed, he spoke plainly about the brutal reality of their mission. Every soldier knew the score. Those first squads were gone. This mission was a death sentence, yet discipline held. Orders were orders, fear or no fear. They would march even if they were marching straight to their graves. They left Samaria with grim focus. Soon enough, they found Elijah on his hill, completely calm and unbothered by their approach. The prophet seemed almost bored by the repetition. How many times would kings fight heaven before learning that some things simply cannot be broken? But as this captain climbed toward Elijah, something shifted. Instead of yelling from a safe distance, he walked right up to speak quietly. No pride left. He fell to his knees. "Man of God," he whispered with real humility, "please show respect for my life and the lives of these 50 men, your servants." This was no royal authority barking demands. This was a terrified soldier begging for mercy from a power far greater than his own. The captain pleaded with raw sincerity. "Look, fire fell from heaven and wiped out the first 2 captains and their men. Please, just spare my life." The shift was absolute. He acknowledged Elijah's power, remembered the dead, and begged for grace where others had only brought pride. The angel of the Lord gave Elijah new instructions. The captain's humility had unlocked a door that arrogance had slammed shut. "Go down with him," the angel said. "Do not be afraid of him." For the first time since this whole war of wills began, Elijah finally stood up. He walked calmly down the hill toward the waiting troops, no longer their target, but their guide. The soldiers formed up around him with quiet respect. They were no longer trying to capture a prisoner. They were escorting him. One man bowing to God had turned enemies into protectors. They marched toward Samaria at a slow, peaceful pace. There was absolutely no rush. The crisis ended the second one man chose humility over pride.
When they reached the palace, Elijah stood right before King Joram. The young king waited, his nerves showing terrified of this legendary figure who had brought nothing but trouble to his entire family. Elijah delivered a sharp, clear message. It was the exact same warning he gave the last king, spoken now to a living ruler who still had time to change. "This is what the Lord says," Elijah declared. "Is it because there is no God in Israel that you sent messengers to consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron?" The question pierced the heart of the king's rule. Why beg foreign gods when the true God of Israel was right there? Why trust Philistine idols when the creator of heaven and earth was speaking? Surprisingly, no immediate death sentence followed this time. Joram still had a window to change. The fire from heaven was meant as a warning, not his final sentence. Whether the young king would learn from his brother's dark end was entirely up to him. The prophet had delivered his message. The future now belonged to the rulers who would bear the heavy weight of their choices. Elijah slipped out of the palace in complete silence. The very soldiers sent to arrest him now protected him on his way out. Humility won where force utterly failed. And now, his final journey begins. Years slipped by after those wild days of fire from heaven. Elijah had grown old. His hair was completely white now. His step carried a little less spring than before, but his spiritual sight was clear as ever. He knew his remaining days on earth were numbered. Beside him walked Elisha, no longer the young farmer who burned his plows when Elijah threw a cloak over him. Years together had forged him into a true man of God, ready to carry the torch. The student had finally become the successor. Their bond had grown deep through shared trials. Elisha had watched his master call down fire, raise the dead, and spit hard truths directly at powerful kings. He absorbed more than just the miracles he learned, the quiet daily discipline of listening for God in the silence. But on this morning, a strange weight in the air. It was a sense of finality, thick and undeniable. A divine appointment. Today would be completely different from any day they had ever shared. "Stay here," Elijah told him as they prepared to leave Gilgal. "The Lord has sent me to Bethlehem." But Elisha would not be left behind, not today with everything hanging in the balance. He had followed his master too far to walk away now. "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live," Elisha answered, "I will not leave you." The promise was absolute. No danger would tear them apart on this final road. Whatever was waiting, they would face it together. They walked from Gilgal toward Bethel, the ancient place where Jacob once dreamed of angels climbing a ladder that touched the heavens. Holy ground where God had sealed his promises to the patriarch. There was no better place to pass through on this final, sacred march. Approaching Bethlehem, a group of local prophets came out to meet them. These were not the royal yes-men who twisted their words to please corrupt kings, but true men of God who knew exactly what this heavy day meant. One of them quietly pulled Elisha aside and whispered, "Did he know the Lord would take his master away today?" The question only confirmed the ache already tightening in Elisha's chest. This was Elijah's last day. The giant of Israel was leaving, and the void he would leave behind felt terrifyingly vast. "Yes, I know," Elisha answered softly, "so keep quiet." He could not bear to waste these final hours debating the inevitable. Some grief is just too deep for chatter. Better to simply walk together in silence than guess at what heaven had already set in stone. As they started moving again, Elijah tried one more time to push Elisha away. "Stay here, Elisha," he urged. "The Lord is sending me to Jericho." But Elisha stood firm. "As surely as the Lord lives and you live, I will not leave your side." So they pressed on together toward Jericho, near the Jordan River. This was the very ground where Joshua led Israel into their promised home. where massive walls had crumbled at the blast of horns. A place soaked in the memory of what God does when people actually believe him. Inside Jericho, the pattern repeated. More prophets approached Elisha with the same hushed question. Did he know his master was being taken today? Again, Elisha told them he knew. And again, he begged them to be quiet. He knew what lay ahead. Talking would not change a thing. Better to guard these last moments than waste them on words. Once more, Elijah tried to leave his student behind. "Stay here," he pleaded. "The Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But once again, Elisha absolutely refused to go. "As surely as the Lord lives and you live, I will not leave you." The repeating cycle showed exactly who these two men were. Elijah, gentle and protective. He wanted to spare his younger friend the agony of watching him disappear. And Elisha, loyal past the point of reason, refused to walk away when it mattered most. 50 prophets from Jericho kept their distance, trailing behind. They could feel the immense weight pressing down on this day. A moment like nothing they had ever seen was unfolding. They stopped to watch from a safe distance as the two men walked steadily toward the Jordan River. These were the same waters that had split for Joshua generations ago, the hard boundary between the dry desert and their promised home. Here, Elijah's work on earth would reach its end. Both teacher and student knew that everything they had built together was down to its final minutes. The prophet who once commanded fire from heaven would soon rise into those very clouds. The young man who left his plow to follow him would soon stand entirely alone. Yet God's plans were far bigger than human sorrow. The call of the prophet would not die here. Heaven's design would be fulfilled. What looked to human eyes like a final end was actually a new beginning. Reaching the bank of the Jordan, they found the river running deep and fast. No miracle had cleared the path yet. It was still just a cold, wide barrier. But Elijah still wore that heavy cloak, the very one he had thrown over Elisha back in the fields. That same rough mantle now hung from shoulders that had carried the spiritual fate of Israel for decades. The last miracle of his life was about to unfold. The Jordan would part again, but this crossing would be different. Only one of them was coming back. Before them, the wild river rolled on, swollen and brown from heavy spring rains in the hills. The rushing current swept down broken branches and thick silt. All of it rushed toward the Dead Sea. On foot, they had absolutely no way across. Elijah stepped right to the muddy edge and removed his heavy cloak. This rough wool had kept him warm through years in the wilderness. It was the physical sign of his calling, worn thin and soft by wind and rain, and yet it still carried all the power heaven had given him. He rolled the fabric tight and raised it high. Then, with the absolute confidence he had shown before wicked kings and pagan prophets alike, Elijah struck the surface of the water. Instantly, the Jordan yielded. The rushing waters split, stacking up high on both sides and leaving a dry, open path straight through the middle. Silt, smooth stones, and gasping fish lay scattered in the sudden dry gap. Elijah stepped right down onto the riverbed without hesitating. He found solid ground where a dangerous current had rushed just seconds earlier. Elisha followed close behind, his face filled with pure awe. The 50 prophets watching from the cliffs gasped. They had grown up on stories of Moses dividing the Red Sea and Joshua crossing this very river. But seeing that same ancient power snap into action through one simple strike of faith was something else entirely. Teacher and student walked together across the dry bottom, while towering walls of water held firm on their left and right. Fish darted behind walls of glass like water. Beneath their feet, wet stones pressed through their sandals. They were walking between two different worlds, caught in a moment where heaven and earth had seamlessly met. The moment they stepped onto the far shore, suddenly the Jordan crashed back together. The river swept onward as if it had never stopped, leaving only wet stones on their sandals to prove what they had just done. They scrambled up the eastern bank into the open wild. Around them lay nothing but jagged rocks and barren, dusty ground. In this quiet emptiness, the veil between this world and the next felt incredibly thin. Elijah turned around to face his friend. Years of shared roads and hard trials had led to this very spot. Elijah's work was done. It was time to pass his burden to younger, stronger hands. "Tell me," Elijah said, "what can I do for you before I am taken away?" The offer hung in the dry desert air like a heavy promise. One last gift from teacher to student. Whatever Elisha asked for, if it was God's will, would be granted before the end. Elisha's answers showed the raw depth of his calling and his faith. He did not ask for riches, long life, or any earthly power. He asked for the spiritual. "A double portion of your spirit," he said. Back in ancient Israel, the firstborn son always got a double share of the inheritance. Elisha was essentially asking to be named Elijah's true spiritual successor. He wanted to continue the prophetic work with even more spiritual power than his mentor possessed. The ask was both incredibly humble and absolutely daring. Humble because he honored Elijah as his master. Breathtaking because he reached for a supernatural gift that no mere human could ever give. Elijah met him with warmth and raw honesty. "You have asked a hard thing, but if you actually see me when I am taken, it is yours. Otherwise, it is not." A simple, stark condition. Keep your eyes on the master during his departure, and the power is yours. Fail, and you get nothing. The final decision belonged completely to God. They kept walking. No more words were needed. Both knew exactly what was coming. Everything had been said. Now they just waited for God's timing. The air itself felt electric with expectation. Every single rock and dry bush seemed completely frozen in place. It felt like nature knew something completely unprecedented was coming. Behind them, the Jordan River flowed quietly on. Ahead lay a barren path that very few had ever traveled. They walked toward a horizon about to reveal something no human had ever seen. Elisha kept right at his master's heels, obsessing over that single condition. He had to witness the departure, or he would lose the inheritance forever. His eyes never drifted from Elijah. Above, the sun climbed higher into the desert sky. Heat waves began to shimmer off the baking rocks, but neither traveler cared about the heat. Not now. They were stepping toward eternity now, and earthly worries simply melted away. The moment was almost here. Heaven was about to claim its servant, leaving earth without one of its greatest prophets. Elisha was about to find out if his faith could survive meeting the divine face to face. The final miracle was closing in. One of the most incredible departures in human history was about to happen. Two men walking side by side toward a moment that would change everything forever. The fiery exit. Cold morning air hung still over the Jordan Valley. Elijah walked beside his loyal friend, their sandals crunching softly on the dry dirt. Both knew today was different. Something sacred drifted through the heavy air around them. Elisha stayed close, never leaving his teacher's side. 3 times the master had tried to leave him behind, but real loyalty grips tight when letting go feels like death. Elisha already knew what was coming. The sky itself seemed to whisper secrets into the passing wind. Soon they reached the riverbank where tall reeds swayed in the slow current. Elijah grabbed his cloak, the same rough wool that had kept him safe during years of desert wandering. He rolled it up with absolute care. His calloused hands moved slowly. The water ahead was deep and wide. There were no shallow spots here, and no bridge for anyone on foot. Then Elijah raised his cloak and struck the water hard. The river instantly split, Solid walls of water rose on both sides, revealing a dry path running straight through the middle. The same God who parted the Red Sea for Moses just carved a highway for his prophet. Elijah stepped forward without pausing. Elisha was right behind him, their sandals pressed into smooth river stones that had been buried under rushing water only seconds earlier. Stranded fish flopped in wet mud that gave softly under their sandals. The roar of held-back water echoed on either side, like a deep, low rumble. Climbing the far bank, Elisha brushed dust from his heavy robe. Elijah turned to look back at the Jordan already flowing normally again. It was a quiet miracle, unhurried. No crowds gathered to watch, no trumpets sounded. They walked on through sparse bushes and jagged stone. The sun kept climbing, casting thick heat off the distant hills. Yet Elijah's steps seemed to grow lighter with every single stride, like invisible wings were already lifting him. Elijah suddenly spoke. "Tell me what you want before I am taken." His voice held a quiet sadness mixed with hope. A mentor's final, ultimate gift to his student. Elisha did not hesitate for a second. "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." The plea came from somewhere far deeper than mere thought. He did not want fame or simple influence. He needed to serve God with that same burning fire that had driven his master for decades. Elijah's face softened. "You have asked a hard thing, but if you witness my departure, you will get it." They kept moving. The desert stretched empty in every direction. There were no shade trees. Not a single building broke the flat line of the horizon. Then it struck. A roar like a massive gale swept through the dry air, and yet not a blade of grass bent. No dust rose from the ground. The noise came from entirely outside this world. Then the horses appeared. Not flesh and blood, but terrifying entities of pure light and crackling fire. Their manes burned like wildfire. Their hooves kicked sparks against the empty air, pulling a chariot that blazed brighter than the noon sun. Elisha collapsed to his knees, his eyes stretched wide in absolute terror and blinding wonder. The fiery horses reared up, their blazing shapes dancing against the blue sky. The chariot wheels spun impossibly fast. A whirlwind began to form from the clear sky, not a destructive storm that flattens homes, but a gentle wind carrying the breath of God. It swept down slowly, moving with deliberate purpose, wrapping itself around Elijah like a father holding a sleeping child. The old prophet looked back one final time. He locked eyes with Elisha. In that brief instant, everything passed between them. Love, gratitude, and a bond that could never be broken. Then the whirlwind took him. His feet left the dirt. The heavy cloak caught that unnatural wind and whipped upward. He rose higher into the blinding fire. My father, Elisha screamed. "Look at the chariots and the horsemen of Israel." His voice cracked, torn between terror and wonder. The man who had been his entire world was rising into the light. And the wind just kept spinning faster. Elijah shrank to a speck. Those fiery horses charged upward, dragging their burning chariot into the deep sky. The thundering hooves faded like distant drums. Then nothing. The wind died. The horses vanished. The burning chariot was gone. Elijah was gone, snatched from the earth without ever tasting death. Only the blinding image of fire burned behind Elisha's eyelids, scarred forever into the memory he would carry to his grave. Then something fluttered in the empty sky. Elijah's mantle drifted downward like a falling bird settling on the dirt among the rocks. The coarse wool showed no scorch marks from that blinding heat, yet it carried every ounce of the authority that had once rested on the prophet's shoulders. Elisha picked it up with shaking hands. The fabric felt entirely ordinary against his skin, just coarse thread worn thin by years of travel, patched up where it had torn. But he knew exactly what he was holding. This plain cloth held the raw power of the Creator. His desperate prayer had been answered. The double portion was his. He stared up one last time, scanning the empty blue sky for any sign of his master. Nothing. Only empty sky and quiet clouds. Elijah had crossed over, leaving behind a silence full of heavy questions, memories, and the terrifying weight of a new calling. It pressed hard on the shoulders of the man standing all alone in the dust, clutching a worn piece of cloth from the greatest prophet Israel had ever seen. The weight in his hands was not the wool itself, but the massive burden of his new destiny. Around him, the world just kept moving. Bees hovered over wild desert flowers. Lizards darted over hot rocks. The Jordan River flowed quietly nearby, the very water that had parted twice today for the prophets of God. But everything had changed. Elisha was no longer the student following behind. He was now the prophet, the man people would turn to with their deepest pain and final desperate prayers. He was the bridge between heaven and a broken earth. Elisha folded the mantle carefully and tucked it tight under his arm. It was time to head back. Time to cross the river and walk his own path as God's messenger. The burning horses were gone, but their invisible tracks were stamped on his soul, proving that heaven is always closer than we think. Walking back to the Jordan River felt so much longer than the trek away. Every step took him further from the spot where heaven had just touched the earth. His master was gone. The divine fire had died. Now there was only dry dirt and empty sky. But the mantle under his arm spoke in its own quiet way. This plain piece of cloth had literally split the Jordan. Would it do it again? He wrestled with the question as he walked. Did God's power actually live inside this wool, or was raw faith the key that unlocked the impossible? The river appeared ahead, flowing quietly between its banks. Reeds bent in the gentle current. Bugs drifted lazily on the surface. Everything felt completely normal, even plain. And yet, he had just watched chariots of fire fly into the heavens. Here lay the Jordan, the exact river that split open hours ago, now flowing as if nothing special had ever happened. Elisha stopped at the water's edge right where he and Elijah had crossed earlier that morning. The river hid its secrets perfectly. No sign of the miracle remained in the muddy current. He unrolled the mantle slowly. The wool felt rough against his skin, worn thin in spots, patched up with painstaking care over the years. It looked like any beggar's old coat. Absolutely nothing about it looked supernatural. Doubt crept into his mind. What if the power rose into the sky with Elijah, leaving him behind? What if this cloak was just dead fabric, now drained of all its power? What if he was standing here, completely alone, holding a useless relic? But then he remembered the whirlwind, the horses of fire, the absolute peace on his master's face as he was swept into the sky. The God who took Elijah was the exact same God who promised a double portion to the one who stayed and watched. Elisha raised the mantle high. "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" he cried out. The words were both a desperate question and a bold declaration. Honest doubt and stubborn faith met in his cry. He slammed the folded mantle down hard on the water. The river stopped. The current piled into massive walls on either side, exposing a dry path straight ahead. Fish hung suspended, their silver scales catching the light. River stones that had not seen sunlight in centuries lay bare and shining. Elisha stared in absolute awe. The waters had parted again, not because the old coat was magical, but because God honors raw faith when a person simply takes him at his word. The double portion was real. He stepped down onto the exposed riverbed, his confidence growing with every step on the smooth stones. A muffled roar of the trapped river pressed in from both sides. High above the towering walls of water caught the noon sun. Cool, wet stones pressed beneath his sandals. This was his first real miracle. No longer the helper trailing behind, he was now Elisha the prophet, chosen to bring God's power into a broken world. Every single step across that dry riverbed locked in his new calling. On the opposite bank, a group of men stood waiting. The young prophets from Jericho had watched the whole thing from afar. They had watched the Jordan split twice in one day. Now they looked at Elisha with pure reverence. "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha," they whispered. Whispers spread like wildfire. Their voices trembled with pure awe. The prophetic mantle had finally passed to hands ready to carry the heavy load. Yet some just couldn't accept what they saw. Death was supposed to be final. People didn't just vanish into a whirlwind. Surely Elijah's body had fallen somewhere nearby. Surely the storm dropped him in some deep, hidden ravine where he lay silent and undiscovered. 50 strong men stepped forward. "Let us go search for your master," they urged Elisha. Maybe the Spirit of the Lord swept him up onto some rugged peak or into a deep gorge. Elisha just shook his hand. He had watched his master ascend with his own eyes. No search party on earth would find someone who had left this physical world. "Don't send them," he insisted quietly. But they wouldn't back down. 50 well-meaning men who simply didn't understand. They kept begging until Elisha finally relented. "Send them," he said, knowing their 3-day search would end in total failure. He knew that sometimes a person has to touch the cold truth themselves instead of just taking another man's word for it. For 3 days they combed the wilderness, scrambling up steep peaks and descending into dark ravines. They searched inside caves and the long rocky ledges, checking everywhere a body might have fallen. They found absolutely nothing, because there was nothing to find. When they came back empty-handed, Elisha didn't gloat. "Didn't I tell you not to go?" he asked quietly. The point was already made. Those 50 men finally realized what they couldn't learn from rumors alone. Something completely miraculous had happened. Elijah wasn't just dropped over the next hill. He had been taken straight from earth to heaven without ever crossing the threshold of death. Word of this spread quickly among the local prophets. From Jericho to Bethel and on to Gilgal, the incredible story traveled. The God of Israel had done something completely new. A servant so incredibly devoted that death's normal rules were bypassed. For Elisha, the return of those men brought a sense of real closure. No lingering doubts remained about his master's fate. No quiet whispering about whether the fiery whirlwind had actually been real. The empty-handed searchers only proved what his heart already knew when the sky went quiet. Elijah was far beyond human reach, living where only the Spirit can go. Now the heavy cloak in his hands felt entirely different. It wasn't just a leftover garment, it was the undeniable mark of God's calling. God had hand-picked him to carry on Elijah's legacy. The parted waters of the Jordan had already proven heaven's stamp of approval. As shadows lengthened across the dusty valley, Elisha walked toward Jericho. Behind him, the Jordan River flowed silently, keeping its deep secrets. Ahead was a city of desperate people carrying heavy burdens that only God could heal. His real work was only just beginning. This double portion wasn't about performing twice as many miracles as Elijah. It meant carrying the true weight of his master's spiritual authority, the strength to stand between heaven and earth, bringing divine help to broken human lives. Soon night settled gently over the dry valley. One by one, stars flickered to life in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Elisha knew his master was resting in undescribed glory. That quiet thought brought comfort and the deep courage he needed for the road ahead. It was time to heal a poisoned spring. Jericho was quiet, sleeping beneath the stars, as Elisha slipped inside. This ancient city had survived countless violent upheavals. Walls had crumbled to trumpet blasts here, and curses had been spoken and broken. Generations lived and died within its gates. But now, a quieter crisis loomed, a slow, creeping threat that choked out life rather than striking with sudden violence. Desperate elders soon arrived at Elisha's door. Months of mounting worry had carved deep lines into their faces. "My lord," they spoke with genuine respect, "we need your help. Our city is beautiful, as you can see, but the water is poisoned and the land is barren." Elisha followed them through the streets of Jericho, watching children play in dusty courtyards. Women swept stone steps outside their doors, while men prepared for another day of hard, fruitless labor. Daily life went on, but a dark shadow hung over their normal routines. Finally, they brought him to the central spring that supplied all their water. Bubbling up from deep underground, this natural spring should have been a constant blessing. Instead, its flow carried a slow, toxic poison. The water looked clear, sparkling in the morning sun, but any livestock that drank from it quickly sickened and died. Fields irrigated with it withered before harvest. What should have brought life was dealing out slow death. Elisha knelt and cupped the water in his palm. The smell was off. Not clean and fresh, but sharp and bitter. Whatever hid beneath the surface had twisted a beautiful blessing into a lethal curse. The spring was completely ruined. "Bring me a new clay bowl," he told the waiting men, "and fill it with salt." It was a strange request. Salt usually ruins drinking water. But these elders had just seen the Jordan River split in half the day before. They trusted this new prophet's strange instructions. They hurried off and returned with a brand new clay bowl that had never been used. It was packed with coarse salt, the kind used for preserving meat. White crystals sparkled in the morning light like tiny gems. Elisha carried the bowl straight to the source where the water bubbled up, dragging hidden poisons from deep within the dark earth below. The healing had to start right here, at the root of the issue, not downstream. He poured the white salt directly into the bubbling spring. The crystals vanished, instantly dissolving into the rising flow. For a long, tense moment, absolutely nothing seemed to change. The water kept flowing just as it always had. Then Elisha spoke with heaven's authority, saying, "This is what the Lord says. I have healed this water. Never again will it cause death or ruin your crops." The miracle wasn't flashy. Water doesn't announce its restoration with dramatic signs, but then a shift. The poison choking the spring was suddenly gone. God's power neutralized it through a simple, common mineral. Within hours, the difference was plain to see. Animals approached the spring without any hesitation and drank deeply. The water tasted clean, fresh, and sweet. Even the dying crops began showing signs of recovery. Word raced through Jericho. Like spilled water, it quickly reached every single corner. The spring was healed. The curse was broken. Life could finally flourish again in their pleasant city. Children ran to taste it. Adults filled their jars with a confidence they had not felt in months. But the real miracle was never simply the healing. It was how God brought it about. Salt, the most common of all preserving agents, had become the tool of complete restoration. It was the most ordinary thing imaginable, changed by God's purpose into something that accomplished the extraordinary. This gentle touch set the pattern for Elisha's entire ministry from the very start. Elijah had called down fire. Elisha brought healing through common elements. His power worked quietly without any grand spectacle, restoring what was broken instead of shattering what still stood. The salt did far more than purify water. It showed what his entire ministry would be like, bringing seasoning and hope into bitter places, instead of pouring down judgment. Months passed, and the spring stayed pure without a single sign of turning bad. Seasons turned. Still, the water ran clean and life-giving. The healing was permanent and complete, lasting proof of God's faithfulness. What he healed, he kept healed. Children who only knew bitter water grew strong drinking from the clean spring. Fields watered by the flow began producing in abundance. Once barren ground now produced crops that no human effort could explain. The miracle quickly became a core part of Jericho's history, passed down through generations. Years rolled by. Do you remember when the spring was bitter? People would ask each other. Remember when the prophet brought salt and spoke God's word? Remember how everything changed? For Elisha, this local miracle set the pattern that would define his calling. He was the prophet of restoration, carrying healing to ordinary daily problems. Not with confrontation or grand spectacles, but through quiet deeds that restored life to what was dead. The empty bowl stayed in his home as a silent reminder, an unremarkable vessel used for such a massive, profound purpose. It revealed how God works, proving that no tool is too common for his hands. No person is too ordinary when heaven chooses to work through them. Soon Jericho's elders began visiting Elisha regularly. Every visit brought news that the spring remained pure. Each report confirmed what they saw God healing through his servant, what no human could fix. Night fell. Families drew water for their evening meals without a single worry, while the spring bubbled on its quiet way, bringing peace to every home. The running water sounded like gentle laughter. After months of carrying only sadness, the city smiled. Clean water flowed toward every home, bringing life to every street. Elisha listened to that sound as he prepared for sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and fresh chances to serve as God's healer. But tonight, Jericho slept peacefully, knowing its water was pure and its future secure. And their prophet walked among them with heaven's authority resting in his hands. Bears and mockers. The road from Jericho climbed through rocky hills toward Bethlehem, winding between stones with the deep patience that ancient roads develop over centuries. Elisha walked the path alone, his wooden staff tapping the dusty ground with every slow, measured step. The morning sun cast long, sweeping shadows ahead as he approached the ancient city, where God's people once offered pure worship before corruption moved in to stay. Bethel held deep significance in Israel's history. Here Jacob slept and dreamed of a ladder reaching to heaven with angels climbing up and down. Here God spoke his covenant promises with solemn clarity. But recent years brought spiritual rot to this sacred site. Golden calves now stood where pure worship was once offered without shame. As Elisha neared the city's outer edge, the sound of young voices carried clearly on the wind. A hostile mob of boys had gathered near the road, somewhere between 20 and 30 of them, ranging from small children to teenagers old enough to know much better. They seemed to be waiting, watching for the prophet. The moment they spotted him cresting the hill, their voices rose in cruel, coordinated mockery. "Go on up, you bald head!" they shouted with cruel laughter ringing through the air. "Go on up, you bald head!" The words cut with a precision beyond ordinary insults. "Go on up" referred directly to Elijah's recent ascension. These young people knew about it and chose to treat it as a subject for ridicule. This was no simple teasing about a man's appearance. This was direct contempt aimed at the power of God that had taken his prophet into heaven. They were not just mocking Elisha. They were mocking the God who sent him. Elisha stopped walking. The jeering grew louder and bolder when he did not respond. Some of the boys threw small stones that kicked up dust around his dusty sandals. Others made crude gestures, their young faces, showing that sharp cruelty that gathers in groups of kids who have never been taught where their own limits end. This was not innocent childhood play. These youth were old enough to understand exactly what respect required. They were old enough to know the difference between reckless play and deliberate, hateful contempt. Their behavior mirrored the deep spiritual decay of Bethel itself, a city that once knew the living God, but had turned its back for golden idols. The prophet turned to face his mockers. No anger showed on his face, but something far more sobering was there. The quiet weight of divine authority. When heaven's representative is treated with open scorn, God does not stay silent. In the name of the Lord, Elisha spoke. He didn't raise his voice, yet it cut across the hillside, freezing every other sound. Instantly, the mockery died. The laughter stopped dead. His words hung over them like a heavy, suffocating weight. Suddenly uncertain, the boys looked at one another in silence. Something in the prophet's voice shifted the air entirely. The morning went dead quiet. Even the birds stopped singing. All of creation seemed to hold its breath. Then came a rustling in the trees, branches snapping under massive weight, heavy footsteps crushing the undergrowth. Low growls raised the hair on the back of every neck. And then 2 massive bears stepped out from the tree line. Their massive shapes lunged forward with a speed that shocked everyone. The mockery dissolved into screaming. The group scattered, but those boys stood no chance of outrunning them. The beasts struck with terrifying, overwhelming efficiency. Claws and teeth tore through the crowd, leaving permanent, brutal reminders of the encounter. When the attack ended, 42 of the young mockers lay injured, many of them severely. Others bore scars they would carry for the rest of their days. Just as quickly, the bears vanished back into the woods, leaving behind a horror story that would be whispered for generations. Elisha took no pleasure in the bloody scene. This was never about personal revenge. This was divine judgment falling hard on those who despised the authority heaven gave its servant. The bears hadn't come because a man's feelings were hurt. They came because the honor of God had been publicly trampled. The few boys who escaped unhurt fled back toward Bethel, screaming in absolute terror. Panic swept the city. This new prophet was clearly not someone to be trifled with. The same God who swept Elijah up into heaven in a chariot of fire had now sent wild beasts to defend his messenger. This single moment would define how people treated Elisha for the rest of his life. The news echoed throughout Israel. Mocking the Lord's prophet carried heavy consequences that no one could predict or control. Yet those bears served a purpose beyond raw punishment. They proved God's power isn't confined to the spectacular, willing miracles of his prophets. Even wild beasts move at heaven's command when sacred authority is treated with cheap contempt. Creation itself answers to the voice of its maker. The wounded boys would eventually heal, but those jagged scars would keep talking long after the pain faded, reminding everyone who heard the story that some boundaries carry lethal weight. Respecting God's messengers wasn't just a social nicety, it was a matter of life and death. Within days, word of the attack reached King Joram in Samaria. Whispers filled the palace corridors about this new prophet who healed poisoned water and commanded forest beasts. Even the hardened skeptics began to look over their shoulders. Even the religious leaders in Bethlehem felt the tremor. Their golden calf suddenly seemed far less impressive, measured against a God who marshals the wild to protect his own. Quietly, some priests began to wonder if their pagan worship deserved a second, more honest look. Elisha took no joy in what happened that morning. He hadn't gone looking for a fight with a crowd of young boys. Yet he knew a prophet's duty is to stand for the Lord's authority, even when that stance brings terrible pain to those who choose rebellion over respect. The dirt road to Bethlehem lay quiet ahead of him now. No more mocking voices gathered to test his resolve. Though the city gates stood open, the people watching from the walls and windows looked down with eyes full of a new heavy emotion. It was a mix of cold fear and the beginnings of real respect. Stepping through the gates of Bethlehem, Elisha pondered the morning's brutal lesson. God's mercy was boundless, flowing as freely as the water from that healed spring to any heart willing to receive it. But his justice was just as real, crashing down like wild beasts when his honor was trampled. Both the mercy and the judgment pointed to the exact same truth, calling a wayward people back to a God who loves them enough to discipline them when love demands it. Behind him, the woods had fallen completely silent. The bears were gone back to their wild rhythms, their grim task done. But the memory of their sudden fury would haunt Bethel for years. It was a permanent warning that God's messengers walk with the absolute protection of heaven. 3 kings and 1 prophet. The message arrived at dawn, brought by an exhausted rider whose horse had galloped through the dark without a single rest. 3 desperate rulers needed a prophet's counsel, and they needed it fast. Things had gone terribly wrong. Their armies were dying of thirst in a merciless desert. King Joram of Israel had convinced King Jehoshaphat of Judah to join him in a war against Moab. The Moabites had rebelled, refusing to pay their massive tribute of sheep and wool. On paper, the plan seemed simple enough. March south, crush the uprising, and restore order. To guarantee success, Jehoshaphat suggested bringing in the king of Edom as a third ally. More soldiers meant a quicker victory. At least, that was the plan. Surely 3 massive armies would easily crush any rebellion Moab could offer. But their chosen route cut through a brutal desert far larger than their maps predicted. 7 agonizing days of endless marching under a baking sun drained their water skins dry. Now 3 entire armies faced death not from enemy swords, but from the slow, agonizing torture of dehydration. Elisha found the desperate kings camped in a dry, barren ravine. Tens of thousands of dying soldiers huddled in whatever thin shade they could find. Even the horses stood dying of exhaustion. The camp was quickly turning into a graveyard. King Joram spoke first, his voice raw and cracked with pure desperation. Had the Lord brought 3 kings together just to hand them over to Moab? Fear swallowed Joram's earlier boldness. Ahab's son now saw enemies lurking in every shadow. Elisha studied Omri's grandson, his eyes cutting right through royal robes to the raw, trembling heart underneath. "Why are you coming to me?" he asked plainly. "Go to the prophets of your father and mother." Elisha spat his words, carrying a sharp, bitter edge. This was the royal line that had spread Baal worship like a plague across Israel. But Jehoshaphat, the faithful king of Judah, stood between them. His presence changed everything. No, Joram groaned. Desperation completely crushed whatever pride he had left. "The Lord brought us 3 kings here just to hand us over to Moab," Joram whimpered. Elisha's tight face softened slightly, his eyes shifting toward Jehoshaphat. Here was a king who still honored the God of their fathers. A man who sought real wisdom instead of playing political games. "As surely as the Lord Almighty lives," Elisha declared, "if I did not respect Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, I would not look at you or even acknowledge your existence." What Elisha demanded next left everyone baffled. "Bring me a harpist," the prophet ordered. Music seemed useless while whole armies were choking to death on dust. But Elisha knew how to quiet his soul, a secret these desperate kings never understood. They found a harpist among the troops, maybe some Levite who used to play in the temple before they handed him a spear. His trembling fingers found the strings. Soft music drifted over the quiet, desperate camp, carving out a space where God's voice could finally cut through the noise of human panic. As the music played, Elisha's posture changed. The hand of the Lord came heavily upon him, that ancient, heavy touch that opened his inner eyes to see divine answers to impossible situations. His gaze turned glassy and distant, staring straight through the desert into the mind of God. This is what the Lord says. Elisha rasped, his voice suddenly thick with authority. I will fill this dry valley with pools of water. You will see no wind. You will feel no rain. Yet the ground will overflow, and you and your livestock will drink. It sounded like madness. Valleys do not suddenly fill with water when there is not a single cloud in the sky. Springs do not bubble up overnight in parched deserts. But the God who splits rivers and heals bitter water can easily drench a dry valley. This is a small thing to the Lord, Elisha continued. He is also going to hand Moab over to you. You will crush every fortified city and major town. You will chop down their fruit trees, choke up their fresh springs, and ruin every fertile field with heavy stones. The next morning brought a miracle they had not dared to dream of. At sunrise, pools of clear water lay spread across the valley floor. These were not puddles, but deep pools reflecting the morning sky like broken glass on the desert floor. No storm had passed, no rain had fallen, yet water stretched as far as they could see. The soldiers drank greedily, feeling life rush back into their dry, aching bodies. Horses plunged their faces into the cool water, drinking until their bellies swelled. Even the weary pack animals took their fill. A place that had almost been their graveyard was now a fresh oasis. But this miracle had a second, darker purpose beyond keeping them alive. The morning sun striking the water created an illusion that would end the war before a sword was even drawn. Across the border, Moabite scouts brought terrifying news to their king. The valley where the enemy camp lay seemed to be drowning in blood. The water reflecting the red dawn looked like thick gore pooled in the dirt. Those kings must have slaughtered each other, the Moabites whispered, growing excited. They must have turned on each other in the dark. They are all dead, and their riches are just lying there waiting for us. Instead of forming lines, the Moabites broke ranks and ran for the easy loot. They came as greedy thieves, not warriors, thinking only of the gold waiting among the corpses. The trap was set. When the Moabites rushed into the valley, they did not find corpses, but fresh, armed soldiers waiting to cut them down. The blood was just water now, but the trap had already sprung. Moab's lines were in chaos, completely caught off guard when the slaughter started. The victory was absolute, exactly as Elisha said. Fortresses crumbled. Ancient trees were chopped to the ground. Springs were plugged, and their best fields were buried under piles of heavy stone. Moab paid a bitter price for defying the God of Israel. As for the three kings, this march became a brutal lesson in raw power. Jehoshaphat went back to Jerusalem with his faith burning bright. A God who carves rivers in the sand and wins hopeless wars. Even Joram, the son of wicked Ahab, had witnessed something that shook his faith in Baal. The prophet he mocked had just saved 3 full armies from certain death, handing them a total victory. That dry valley where they almost perished became a permanent landmark in the minds of all who survived. Locals would point to the dusty canyon and repeat the tale for generations. Because when the impossible actually happens, it leaves deep scars that time cannot erase. Then came the widow's oil. A woman arrived at dusk, long shadows stretching across Elisha's courtyard. Her ragged clothes spoke of a sudden brutal poverty. Fabric that had once been fine was now carefully patched together, faded from better days, though she still carried herself with a heavy, quiet dignity. She was a woman fighting a desperate battle. "My husband is dead," she began, her voice steady despite the raw grief in her eyes. "And you know he feared the Lord, but now a creditor is coming to drag my 2 boys away as slaves." Elisha knew her husband. He was one of the prophets. He had served God faithfully, but got nothing but poverty in return. Such men often died young, worn down by spiritual labor and the brutal reality of living by faith alone. Under the laws of those days, the creditor's claim was entirely legal. When a man died in debt, his family had almost no options left. Land and possessions were seized, and if that still wasn't enough, creditors could take the children as bondservants to work off the debt. For a widow, losing her sons meant losing everything, her only support in old age. Without them, she faced a future of begging or slow starvation in a world with no safety net for a woman alone. "How can I help you?" Elisha asked, though her poverty was clearly written across her entire appearance. "Tell me, what do you have in your house?" That question must have felt pretty cruel at first. If she had owned anything of value, she surely would have sold it to pay her debts. But the prophet had learned to search for a miracle in the smallest of beginnings. "Your servant has nothing there at all," she answered, then paused, searching her memory, except a small jar of olive oil. A tiny thing, barely enough to cook 1 meal or keep a lamp burning for a few hours. In a home stripped bare by creditors, this single jar was somehow overlooked, perhaps deemed too worthless to even bother claiming. Yet in God's way of measuring, the smallest seed could yield a massive harvest. "Go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars," Elisha instructed. "Don't ask for just a few. Gather as many as you can possibly find, from every family willing to lend them." The woman stared at him, unsure. Empty jars made no sense when she had nothing to put in them. But she had come seeking a miracle, and prophets sometimes gave instructions that only made sense on the other side of obedience. "Then go inside and shut the door behind you and your sons," he continued. "Pour oil into all the jars, setting each aside as it fills." Faith required action, even when that action seemed completely foolish by ordinary standards. The widow bowed respectfully and went to do exactly as the prophet said. If God's servant said empty jars would solve her problem, then empty jars she would gather. She spent the next day visiting neighbors, explaining her need without shame. "May I borrow your empty jars?" she asked at door after door. "The prophet told me to collect as many as possible." Her neighbors responded with surprising generosity. Maybe they remembered her husband's kindness, or perhaps the desperation in her voice touched hearts that might otherwise have stayed closed. Jars soon began arriving at her house. Clay vessels of every size and shape, empty and waiting for whatever she had in mind. By evening, her tiny home overflowed with borrowed containers. Massive storage jars stood right beside the smaller vessels used for daily cooking. Wine jars sat next to water pots, filling every inch of space. Simple containers waiting to be made full. The widow gathered her 2 sons around her. The prophet had said to shut the door. She reminded her boys that this miracle, whatever form it took, would happen in private. No crowd would gather to watch. No big announcement beforehand. Just a desperate mother and her children, surrounded by empty jars, armed with nothing but impossible hope. She lifted her tiny vessel of oil and began to pour. The golden liquid flowed, filling the first jar far beyond what her container should have held. She kept pouring, and the oil kept flowing, defying every natural law of physics and capacity. The first jar filled to the brim, yet her tiny vessel was still full. She moved to the second, then the third, each receiving its full measure, while her original supply seemed completely untouched. Her sons watched in absolute shock as jar after jar filled with pure olive oil. The small room soon smelled like an olive press at peak harvest. The golden liquid caught the lamplight, throwing dancing reflections across the walls. "Bring me another jar," she called to her oldest son. When one vessel was filled, he handed her the next, his eyes wide with absolute wonder. The oil kept flowing, as if that tiny jar held an ocean of liquid gold. Hours passed, and the work continued. Every borrowed container was filled until her small house was packed with pure, rich oil, the kind that fetched top prices in any market. Finally, as the last jar filled to the brim, the widow looked around for another vessel. Not a single one remained empty. Every container had received its share. Only then did her small jar run dry, its supernatural flow stopping the exact moment they ran out of vessels. "The oil stopped," she whispered to her sons, though they could see it clearly themselves. This miracle had boundaries, not because God's power was limited, but because her faith was measured by the number of jars she had gathered. The size of her expectation had set the limit of her blessing. The next morning, she ran to Elisha, gasping out, "I did exactly what you said. Every jar is full." The oil kept flowing until we ran out of vessels. Elisha received her news with quiet satisfaction. "Go sell the oil and pay your debts," he told her. "You and your sons can live on the rest." The sale brought in more money than she dared hope. Premium olive oil commanded high prices at market, and she had jar after jar to sell. The debt threatening her children was paid in full, leaving plenty to secure their future. Her sons remained free. Their inheritance was saved, and the creditor received exactly what he was owed, without complaint. Justice was satisfied, and mercy triumphed. A family that had been standing on the very edge of ruin was suddenly on solid ground. The borrowed jars were returned with grateful thanks. But the story of what happened inside that closed room quickly spread to everyone who had lent a vessel. The neighbors who kindly lent their containers now stood as direct witnesses to God's faithfulness. Soon word reached other widows in desperate straits. If God could multiply oil for one struggling mother, perhaps he would show them mercy too. Hope began to grow where despair had taken deep root. For Elisha, this miracle set the pattern for his entire ministry. God worked through the most ordinary things: salt and springs, old cloaks, wild bears, oil, and empty jars. Heaven broke into the everyday world right where desperate need met quiet faith. Take that widow. Her overflowing oil revealed a different kind of math, where we see nothing but empty pockets. God sees a harvest waiting. A single jar turned into a flowing spring. Every empty container became a sudden blessing. Deep desperation became the starting point for a miracle. Years passed. Her boys grew up. They started families of their own, but she still told the story of that night when the oil flowed like water. It saved their lives then, but the memory stayed alive, carrying hope long after the last jar was sold. She kept one tiny clay pot as a reminder. Not the original jar that held the supply, but one of the borrowed pots they had filled that night. Whenever her grandchildren visited, she would hold up that dusty clay jar and tell them how God fills up the empty spaces. Then there was the Shunammite woman. The road from Mount Carmel to Samaria ran straight through Shunem, a quiet, wealthy town of sturdy homes, where clean streets were lined with shady trees and busy merchants did their daily business. A woman lived there whose deep kindness would earn her a permanent place in the stories of her people. She was incredibly wealthy, not just in gold and land, but in wisdom and a generous heart. People deeply respected her husband, and their home was remarkably well-ordered and comfortable. Their reputation was flawless. Yet despite all their ease, one painful thing was missing. Then Elisha traveled through Shunem for the first time. She noticed him immediately. There was something about his quiet walk that set him completely apart from all the other ordinary travelers on that road. He seemed completely at peace, yet entirely focused. She felt a quiet holiness about him, the way you feel heat from a fire before you even see the sparks. She called out to him as he passed her gate. "Please come in and eat." Hosting strangers was a duty back then, but she meant it from the heart. She wanted to care for this traveler. The meal she prepared was rich and thoughtful. Fresh, warm bread, tender roasted meat, garden vegetables, and fine wine from her cellar. She served him with joy, wanting absolutely nothing in return except the chance to help a man of God. Elisha was deeply grateful. The food was wonderful. The conversation was easy. And the house felt incredibly peaceful after weeks of dusty roads and cold nights. As he walked away, he carried the warmth of her welcome with him. That was only the beginning. Every single time the prophet passed through Shunem, she invited him in. What started as a kind gesture became a steady sanctuary. Her table was always set for him. One evening, she told her husband, "I am certain this traveler who keeps visiting us is a holy man of God." She suggested, "Let us build a small room on our roof. We can put a bed inside, a table, a chair, and a lamp, so he can stay here whenever he passes by." Her husband agreed right away. He trusted his wife's intuition completely, having seen her wisdom proven right over many years of marriage. If she saw a real holy man in this prophet, they should take care of him as generously as possible. They built the roof room with care, keeping it simple but comfortable. They added a basic bed and a solid table for writing. There was a chair for resting and a small oil lamp for light. It was a quiet study for a weary traveler on a long journey. On Elisha's next visit to Shunem, she led him upstairs and showed him the room. "This is for you," she said. "A quiet retreat whenever you need it." Elisha was touched. Plenty of people offered a quick meal or a floor for the night, but very few understood how much a prophet needed actual peace and quiet. He needed a space to pray and gather his strength. That simple room became his sanctuary. Away from the demanding crowds, he could seek God in the quiet. He had a lamp to read by a table for his meals, and a bed to rest his exhausted body. Resting in his quiet room one afternoon, Elisha asked his servant Gehazi, "What can we do for this woman? Her extraordinary kindness deserved some reward. She had gone to so much trouble for them." Gehazi had been watching their hostess with very practical eyes. "Well, she has no son, and her husband is quite old," Gehazi said. He saw the silent grief in this wealthy home, the one void money could never fill. Back then, sons meant security. Without them, a woman faced isolation. It was a heavy grief. It meant growing old alone, the end of the family name, and a lifetime of silent worry. All her riches could not buy a solution. Elisha called her up to the doorway of his room, and she came immediately, probably expecting another simple request or to hear when he was leaving. But Elisha looked straight at her and said, "About this time next year, you will hold a son." The words hit her hard. A baby. It was the one dream she had forced herself to forget. She had made peace with the idea that she would never be a mother. Years of disappointment had built a thick wall around her heart. "No, my lord," she pleaded. "Please do not lie to me." Her trembling voice showed just how deeply that old wound still cut. False hope was far worse than cold reality. But Elisha was not guessing. He spoke with absolute certainty. God had shown him what was coming for her. Her generous heart would be rewarded with the one thing she wanted most, the single gift she never dared to request. Over the next few months, her faith was tested daily. Could she actually trust his words? Could she dare to hope for something she had wanted so badly? Soon her body began to change, showing signs she thought were impossible. When spring finally came and the time drew near, she still struggled to believe it. But labor pains do not lie, and the brand new life growing inside her was completely real. The prophet's word came to pass exactly as he said. A healthy, perfect birth. She cradled the newborn with shaking hands, counting tiny fingers and toes in the quiet of that upper room, the exact place where the promise was first whispered. The walls seemed to echo with quiet gratitude. Tears ran down her husband's wrinkled cheeks as he held their son an impossible gift in his old age. But God simply bypassed nature's limits. Their quiet home, once heavy with a silent grief no one ever dared mention, now echoed beautifully with infant cries and pure, vibrant life. He grew fast. First wobbly steps, first spoken words, then tiny hands trying to help carry the wood. Every season brought a new wave of wonder. Each little victory meant everything to a couple who had given up on ever being parents. Meanwhile, Elisha kept staying in his rooftop quarters on his journeys. But now those visits meant playing with the boy whose laughter proved God actually keeps his promises. The holy man watched with fatherly pride. Day by day, the mother's trust in God grew deeper. She now knew that when God speaks, the impossible becomes reality. The child running in her yard was living proof that heaven listens. Years drifted by in their peaceful Shunammite home. The little boy shot up, turning into a strong lad, ready to help his father bring in the grain. Up on the roof, the prophet's room stood waiting, a quiet monument to a kindness repaid in ways they could never have dreamed of. But a shadow was coming, a trial that would push this family's belief to its absolute breaking point. Their precious boy was about to become the center of a horrific nightmare, dragging his mother's faith and her bond with the prophet into the dark. The boy lives again. Harvest came back to Shunem, bringing its familiar grind of sweat and hope. The Shunammite's son was old enough now to follow his father to the fields, running behind the reapers as they cut grain under a scorching sun. It started like any other harvest morning. The boy darted ahead of the workers, weaving through the tall stalks of wheat with endless, joyful energy. His laughter drifted across the fields, mixing with the swish of sharp scythes and the rough shouting of men. Then the midday heat hit like a hammer. Something went terribly wrong. The boy stopped, clutched his temples, and let out a sudden, agonizing scream that came out of nowhere. "My head! My head!" His desperate cry sliced right through the noise of the harvest. The blade work stopped. His father dropped his sickle and sprinted to the collapsed child, scooping him up gently from the dirt. Fever scorched his small body. This was no simple fatigue from the blistering sun. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. Ice filled the father's chest despite the baking heat. He looked at a servant and ordered him to carry the boy home to his mother. Only a mother's touch could soothe a blow this sudden and severe. The worker took off, sprinting back toward the house with the boy in his arms. The boy's limp head rolled against the shoulder. Every single step seemed to make his agony worse. Ragged gasps shook his body. His skin burned like fire. The mother met them and took one look and knew this was a fight for his life. She carried him straight up to the rooftop room, Elisha's quiet sanctuary, the exact space where his birth had been promised. Tenderly, she laid him down on the prophet's own bed, the very frame where the holy man slept on his travels. Perhaps some blessing still lingered in this space. Maybe the holy man's quiet prayers could protect her dying child. His gasps grew weaker. His skin grew hotter. She knelt right there, squeezing his burning hands. She was forced to watch helplessly as the life drained from her miracle child. At noon, he stopped. His small chest went still. He was gone. The boy promised by the prophet, the child who brought pure light to their home. The child lay lifeless on Elisha's bed. Gently, she closed his eyes, smoothed his hair, and folded his cold hands. Then she quietly walked out, shut the door, and went downstairs to face her husband. She wore a mask of sheer, terrifying calm. He felt the weight of it as she demanded a servant and a donkey. Riding to the man of God was her only demand. Her husband stared at her, utterly confused. It was neither a holy feast, nor the Sabbath the usual times to seek him. Why go today? he asked, searching her cold, blank face. She only gave him 4 words. It will be all right. Keeping the horror upstairs to herself. Some talks had to wait. Crisis demanded action over words. The servant quickly readied the beast, knowing from her stiff posture that every second counted. She mounted and rode hard toward Mount Carmel, where Elisha spent his hours in prayer. Ride fast, she urged the servant. Do not slow down for anything unless I tell you. This long road felt endless. Every single second of delay felt like she was abandoning the dead boy back in that room. Up on the mountain, Elisha saw her coming from miles away. The frantic pace of her ride triggered an alarm in his spirit. This was no casual visit. He pointed her out to his servant Gehazi, saying, "There is the Shunammite. Run down and ask if she is okay, if her husband is okay, and if the boy is fine." Gehazi sprinted down the steep slope to intercept her, shouting his questions breathlessly as he caught up with her panting donkey. She told him everything was fine, but her gaze stayed locked on Elisha up on the ridge. In a way, it was true, because in God's hands, where death is never the final word, everything could still be all right. She pushed past Gehazi, scrambling up toward Elisha. When she reached him, she collapsed at his feet and clung to them, her composure completely shattering under the heavy weight of her grief. Gehazi tried to push her away, thinking her behavior was totally improper for a man of God. But Elisha stopped him. "Leave her alone," he snapped. "She is in deep pain, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not explained why." Then she spoke the words that laid it all bare. "Did I ask you for a son, my Lord? Didn't I tell you not to raise my hopes?" The prophet understood instantly. The boy was dead. The miracle child whose birth showed God's power now lay completely cold. And this woman who never even wanted a son was drowning in the agony of losing the one thing she loved more than life itself. Elisha barked quick orders to Gehazi. "Tuck your cloak into your belt, grab my staff, and run. Do not stop to greet anyone along the way. If anyone speaks to you, ignore them. Put my staff on the boy's face." But the grieving mother would not settle for a servant with a piece of wood. "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live," she insisted, "I will not leave you." If there was any chance of saving her boy, it lay with the prophet himself, not with some messenger. Elisha saw the fierce look in her eyes and knew this mother would never accept halfway measures or hand-off solutions from anyone else. Her faith rested in God's power flowing through his prophet, not in some symbolic gesture sent with a servant. Together they headed back to Shunem, walking the same road the woman had just rushed down in total panic. Gehazi sprinted ahead carrying the staff, but both of them knew the real battle with death was still ahead. When they arrived, Gehazi met them with news that crushed their remaining hope. "The boy has not woken up," he told them. The staff did nothing. Death still held a tight grip on the miracle child. Elisha went straight up to the small roof room. He shut the door behind him, locking out the noise and everyone's expectations. This was a private war between God's prophet and the final enemy. The boy lay exactly where his mother had left him, quiet and completely breathless. Elisha knelt by the small, cold body and prayed, crying out to the God who had promised this miracle birth, but now seemed to allow this tragedy. Then he did something truly startling. He stretched himself out on the child, pressing mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, and hands to hands. Flesh touched flesh. Life reached for death in a desperate, silent struggle. The boy's body began to grow warm, but there was still no breath. Elisha got up and paced back and forth, praying without stopping. Then he stretched over the boy again. This time, a tiny spark of life stirred. Suddenly, the boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Death let go. breath filled his quiet lungs once more. The resurrection happened in absolute silence, in a room with no crowd to witness the miracle. "Go call the Shunammite," Elisha ordered Gehazi. As she climbed the stairs, her heart hammering with terrifying hope, the prophet simply said, "Take your son." She collapsed at his feet, crying, then scooped her living boy into her arms. The boy who was dead that morning was alive by evening, warm and breathing. At first, they kept this miracle entirely to themselves. Some miracles are just too sacred to share right away. But over time, word began to leak out, boosting Elisha's reputation as a man who carried God's own authority over life and death. For the Shunammite woman, the lessons of that afternoon would anchor her faith for the rest of her days. God's gifts might face brutal trials, but His power remains stronger than any enemy, even death itself. The son she never even asked for had been given to her twice, both times from the very same faithful God. Meanwhile, there was Naaman the leper, far to the north in Damascus. The greatest commander in the Syrian army was losing a quiet war he had absolutely no power to fight. Naaman earned deep respect from kings and struck terror into his enemies. But leprosy had launched its own brutal campaign against his flesh, and no battle strategy could turn the tide. It started quietly, just a small patch of discolored skin he hoped would fade on its own. But this disease never retreats. It crept forward steadily, claiming new ground on his arms and face, marking him as unclean, despite all his power and high rank. A young Israelite girl captured during a Syrian border raid worked in Naaman's house. Stolen from her family, she was given to Naaman's wife as a common servant. She was just one more nameless casualty in the endless border wars between neighboring kingdoms. She had grown up hearing stories of Elisha, how he healed poisoned springs and raised dead children. Somehow her faith survived her captivity. As she watched her master's condition grow worse every single week, a deep compassion overcame any bitter resentment she might have held against the people who captured her. "If only my master would go see the prophet in Samaria," she told her mistress one morning while helping with her chores. "He would cure him of his leprosy." She spoke with such quiet confidence that Naaman's wife went straight to her husband with the news. This was real hope from an unlikely source, a captive slave whose people were bitter enemies. Yet her concern was genuine and her confidence absolute. Naaman took the girl's idea straight to the king of Syria, explaining that his young servant believed Israel's prophet could heal him. The king agreed it was worth a shot. Losing his best general was not an option, and would be a far worse disaster than chasing a strange lead. So the Syrian king wrote a formal letter to the king of Israel. "I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so you can cure his leprosy," the letter read. He also packed up a massive tribute to go with it: 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of royal clothing. When Israel's king read the message and saw the massive fortune, he completely panicked. "Am I God?" he screamed, tearing his clothes in pure panic. "Can I kill and bring people back to life? Why does this king expect me to cure leprosy? He is clearly just trying to pick a fight with me." To be fair, his paranoia made perfect sense. Syria was clearly setting a trap. If Israel's king failed to cure this incurable disease, the Syrians would cry insult and launch another invasion. The whole setup felt like a pure provocation. Elisha soon heard of the king's panic. "Why did you tear your robes?" The prophet sent word saying, "Send the man to me, and he will know there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman arrived at Elisha's house with massive fanfare. Chariots and horses crowded the street. Soldiers stood stiffly at attention while servants carried precious gifts. Half of Damascus seemed to crowd the humble prophet's doorstep. Yet instead of rushing out to greet this legendary general, Elisha stayed deep inside his house. He merely sent a messenger with a simple command: Go wash 7 times in the Jordan, and your skin will be completely healed. Naaman's face twisted with rage at what felt like a flat insult. He had expected a grand welcome fitting for a man of his high rank. He wanted solemn rituals, loud prayers, and the deep respect due to a commander of armies. At least the prophet could have stepped outside to greet him face to face. I thought he would surely come out, stand before me, and call on the name of the Lord his God. Naaman fumed to his servants. He expected Elisha to wave his hand over the diseased skin and cure the leprosy. This remedy felt like another joke. Are not the Damascus rivers of Abana and Pharpar far better than all these waters of Israel? He demanded to know. Why couldn't I wash in those clean rivers instead? After all, Damascus boasted mountain streams that sparkled like pure crystal. The Jordan, by comparison, was just a muddy, unremarkable stream. If river water could heal leprosy, surely Syria's pristine rivers would work better than this murky Israeli creek. He turned, disgusted, humiliated, and with his hopes completely shattered, he prepared to leave. But his servants knew him well enough to speak up when it mattered most. They loved their commander far more than they feared his legendary temper. They saw a golden opportunity, while he only saw an insult. "My father," one of them said softly, choosing a warm term of deep respect and genuine affection. "If the prophet told you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? How much more then when he simply says, 'Wash and be clean'?" The logic was impossible to ignore. Naaman had been totally ready to endure any extreme painful cure. Why walk away now just because the task was simple? What did he have to lose? Just pride. Slowly, his boiling anger cooled as common sense broke through his bruised ego. These men had marched with him through hostile lands, sharing every danger. Their advice came from fierce loyalty, not a lack of respect. "You are right," he finally admitted. "If I was willing to risk everything on a hard task, why refuse something this easy?" Choosing to trust was slow. It had to fight through his deep military pride and his strong feeling of cultural superiority. But the moment finally came. The road to the Jordan River wound through boring, everyday countryside, showing absolutely no sign that any divine power was waiting there. When they finally reached the water, it was disappointingly plain. Just a muddy, sluggish river with dirt banks and absolutely nothing special about it. Naaman's men helped him climb down to the muddy edge. His advanced leprosy had reached a stage where every movement caused sharp pain. The raw white patches on his arms and face stood out horribly in the bright sun. He waded into the river, feeling the cool water swirl around his heavy legs. Nothing happened. No magic tingle. No instant relief. Only the murky Jordan water flowed around him like any ordinary river. He plunged completely under and rose, counting silently 1. Muddy water poured from his hair and matted beard, still diseased. On the bank, his servants watched with tight chests. Under he went again, and back up too. The raw patches still glared back. A quiet doubt whispered that this whole trip was a fool's errand. 3, 4, 5. Each plunge took more effort and tested his fading resolve. On the shore, his servants looked deeply worried. Maybe those clean Syrian rivers really were better, after all. Maybe this healer was just a fake. 6 times under 6 times rising unchanged. Only 1 try left. This was the ultimate test. Could Israel's God cure what Syrian doctors called hopeless? Naaman took a deep breath and went under. The 7th time. He rose, gasping, wiping muddy water from his eyes. Everything had changed. The raw patches were gone. His skin was smooth and fresh, just like a young child's. He stared at his own arms in absolute shock. The aggressive leprosy that had plagued him for months was gone, completely erased, without leaving a single trace.
His skin was actually healthier than it had been before the sickness ever started.
His servants shouted with pure joy, splashing into the muddy water to hug their master. The man they had watched slowly rot away was now entirely whole.
This plain little Jordan had done what Syria's grandest rivers never could. Naaman's heart swelled with a raw emotion that went far deeper than words. He felt intense gratitude for the simple cure,
Wonder at a God who could heal the incurable, and deep shame for his own stubborn pride. He almost rejected the easiest instructions in the world. Shaken, they headed straight back to Elisha's house. But this time Naaman approached as a completely different man. His massive ego had been washed down the river, right along with his disease.
He now possessed a quiet reverence for a power he used to mock.
"Now I know there is no true God in all the world except in Israel," he declared. "Please accept a blessing and a gift from your servant," he begged. But Elisha refused to touch it. "As surely as the Lord lives whom I serve, I will take nothing." This miracle was a gift of grace, not a business deal to be settled with gold. Yet Naaman kept begging him to take it. Still, the prophet stood firm. Realizing he could not pay him, the Syrian general made a completely different request. "If you will not take a gift, please let me take home as much dirt as 2 mules can carry. From now on, your servant will never offer sacrifices to any god but the Lord." That odd request showed how completely his whole world had been turned upside down. He wanted to pack up Israelite soil, carry it back to Damascus, and worship Israel's God while standing on Israel's own dirt. He had come looking for a simple cure, but he left with something much deeper. A total inner shift that changed everything. Yet his final plea showed just how messy his new life would be. He begged the Lord to forgive him for one specific thing. "When my master goes to worship in the temple of Rimmon leaning on my arm, I have to bow down too. When that happens, may the Lord forgive your servant." Elisha understood. This was a man with a brand new faith who still had to do his duty in a pagan royal court. "Go in peace," the prophet said, blessing the man as he went back to walk that tightrope between a changed heart and royal duty. Naaman headed home with clean skin and a new spirit, carrying Israelite dirt and a fresh faith back to Syria. The young servant girl who started it all watched him go. Her simple suggestion had changed her master's life in ways she never imagined, bringing dead bones back to life. Years flowed through Israel like quiet rivers. Elisha grew old serving the God who had called him away from his plow so many decades ago. With white hair and a slower step, his faith still remained rock solid. People still came from far away, drawn by his reputation, looking for wisdom and miracles. He had received a double portion of Elijah's spirit, and he used it well. Poisoned springs were healed. Whole armies were saved. Widows found food. Children were pulled back from the very edge of death. His entire life showed God acting in human affairs. But even a great prophet must face death. The body that carried God's power for decades was finally wearing out. Elisha could feel his strength slipping away like water from a cracked jar. Soon he would join his old master beyond this earthly life. When King Joash of Israel heard the great prophet was failing, he rushed to his side. He was the grandson of Jehu, born to a royal family that shattered Ahab's house and swept Baal worship right out of the northern kingdom. Lying weak in bed, the prophet was clearly living out his final moments. My father, the king!" cried. He used the exact words Elisha had shouted when Elijah went up. The chariots and horsemen of Israel. He knew losing this man was a disaster. It was like losing an entire army of divine protection. Yet even as he lay dying, Elisha kept speaking for God. He gave the king exact orders on how to fight off the Syrian threat, promising victories that would happen even after he was gone. His last prophetic words gave Israel real hope. And when death came, it was gentle. No whirlwind came to sweep Elisha up to heaven like Elijah. No chariots of fire raced down to carry him off. He simply took his last breath and slipped quietly beyond the veil. The entire nation felt the blow from the royal palace down to the poorest mud brick homes. Everyone remembered how this gentle prophet had touched their lives. Stories of his miracles and wisdom were passed down again and again. They spoke of his deep love for the poor and helpless. Finally, they laid him in a stone tomb, a resting place saved for heroes. The entrance was sealed. Elisha's work seemed done. His bones lay in the dark, waiting like everyone who dies in faith. But God was not finished with him yet. Next spring brought Moabitete raiding parties, just like always when the weather cleared. These were not organized armies, though. They were just bands of robbers crossing the border for quick loot before running home. Some Israelites were burying a man when Moabite raiders suddenly topped the hill. Panic hit the mourners. They could not outrun horsemen while carrying a heavy body. They had to hide right away or face capture and death. Elisha's tomb was close by, and its stone door was already halfway open. Maybe visitors had recently come to honor the prophet. Terrified, the mourners made a split-second call they would dump the body into the nearest open grave. They shoved the stone and dropped their dead friend right into the prophet's tomb. There was no time for a proper funeral or respect. Getting the body out of sight before the raiders hit was all that mattered. Inside the dark tomb, the corpse slid and touched Elisha's dry bones. Dead skin touched the bones of a man who had raised the dead during his life. Power still lingering in those dry bones surged into the dead man. Suddenly, the dead man stood right up, gasping for air. Death let go. The mourners stared terrified as their friend climbed out of the grave on his own 2 feet, confused, but very much alive. Riding right past, the Moabitete raiders had no clue what just happened. They only saw a few scared people running away. But those people were actually witnessing the final, incredible miracle of Elisha's life. Even in death, his dry bones held resurrecting power. The God who worked through his living hands was still at work through his skeleton. Death could not stop the divine life that had defined his years on earth. Living his new life, the resurrected man told his wild story to everyone he met from that day on. Rumors spread like wildfire from town to town about the dead prophet whose bones could literally pull someone back from the grave. His reputation for miracles grew even larger in death than in life. Soon crowds began traveling to his grave, desperate for a healing touch or a blessing where such power had worked. The cave with his bones became a famous site of prayer. It proved to everyone that God's power outlives his servants, going right past the grave. For the man who was raised, life was never normal again. He had crossed over to the other side and returned. From then on, every single sunrise felt like an absolute gift. Drawing breath was a miracle, a daily gift. Every morning became a fresh chance to serve the God who called him back. This shock of life sent a wave through Israel. Their neighbors bowed to idols whose grip ended at the tomb. But Israel's God ruled the grave, turning dry bones into a source of life for his faithful servants. Elisha's final miracle was just a whisper of what was coming. If dry bones could raise the dead, what happens when God's own Son faces death and shatters it forever? That dusty grave was just a preview of an empty tomb in Jerusalem. Soon, whispers of the wonder crossed borders reaching pagan palaces. A nation with resurrecting bones clearly served a God who demanded to be taken seriously by everyone around them. He demanded raw fear and wonder, absolute awe. Decades slipped by, and the prophet's bones lay quiet in the cave. But that raw spark of life stayed locked in the memory of the people. They had seen real proof that their Creator was stronger than the grave. When their own final hour approached, they would remember the man who brushed Elisha's bones and walked out of the dark, alive. If dry bones could raise the dead, surely God would remember his loyal servants when they stepped through that final dark door. Those buried bones became a quiet beacon of hope. For the faithful, the grave was never going to be the end of the story. Life would always have the ultimate say, because the Creator who first shaped man from clay was still breathing life into dry dust. Inside that dark, sealed tomb, heavy silence reigned. Then a spark. Raw power surged from dry bones into fresh, warm flesh. This spark turned the longest night into a sudden morning. It was a quiet miracle witnessed by only a few, but the ripple shook eternity.